Good evening, good evening, good evening. I hope you can all hear me well enough. I'm John, the old geek, as you all know, and I'm here already with Elfbait. Who is that? Your real name, Elfbait?
Yeah,
Elon.
Eli.
Oh, you've doxed yourself.
Oh no. Just like the last 20 years of internet hasn't done that already.
Right, I've just had to close my I had a YouTube window in the background so I could hear myself on 20 second delay, which was very disturbing. And I'm also joined here by Saxius. Hello, Saxius.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be here.
And those regulars will also notice that Elfbait has changed his picture as well, showing off his mighty beard growth.
Yes, that's exactly why I did it, is to show off my mighty beard growth.
Yes, you're. It's part of masculinity. I mean, baldness and beard growth are signs of masculinity. Right, I'll say hello to Major's Musings, who was here nice and early. Grumpy Old Slan, David Leonard, Doof Money, all here. No milestone reached yet. I'm on 985 still, so that's not happening just yet. So you have to wait till possibly next week. But tonight I'm going to be talking, and hopefully we are going to be talking about experience points. We are all DMs of games. We will all have our own favoured means of giving out XP, allowing our players to push their characters up through levels and achieve herodom and whatever it is they want to seek out from the game. Now, I am a big fan of XP. I'm going to say that now. Elfbait, XP or Milestone?
I default to XP. It's old hat for me, so and I like the chasing of XP, so. But occasionally I'll just occasionally I'll just throw in a milestone if I feel it's been grinding for a while. So.
Okay. And Saxius?
I am primarily an XP person. However, I do use the milestone specifically for when I run more of the modern day games like 5th edition, because I think the crowd that I'm usually courting with that has almost an expectation for that, though I am developing an appreciation for the milestone versus the XP.
Right. Well, I have no appreciation for milestone whatsoever. I'm gonna tell you that. I'm gonna tell you that straight away. In any level-based game, I love the gathering of XP, and as a DM, I like handing out XP, and I like to see my players' little faces light up when they realise they've hit enough to gain a level, and then the crashing pain of them realizing they've not got enough money to train for that level. Anyway, that's AD&D anyway. But for me, it does depend on the system. In a level-based game, XP all the way. I do like the way skill-based systems do it. I think Call of Cthulhu has a great way of improving skills. We'll come to that later. No XP in that, but there's a very different way of doing it. So it does depend on game system and game style in a sense, but I think, in my opinion, XP is D&D's currency. Focusing on D&D, I believe it is D&D's currency, and it's tangible rewards for the players, things for the players to aim for, and I think it defines how the players will approach the game as well. And I think that is key to getting the style of game as a DM that you want. If you train your players into realizing how you give out XP, you can actually train them into playing in a manner in which you prefer. Which is no bad thing, because as DMs, we've got to enjoy the game as well. I can see Saxius's you don't think we deserve to enjoy the game, Saxius?
No, we deserve to be locked in a cage, prodded with electricity, and told to write more games. That's my experience. That's what happens when for me at least, I get kidnapped. I get told, "Here's a corner, Oscar. Now go make games."
Well, that's what happens. I don't think that's what we all want. So
I blame the Swedes for the Stockholm syndrome that I'm now experiencing. So it's just all going full circle. No, like, okay, so let's actually delve into this and talk about why we like what we like and what the benefits are that we see for it.
Yeah,
let's go in there.
I agree with Simon here. Hello, Simon. I don't see you on these. I've commented on the videos. I've seen you on the streams before. I don't. Well, maybe I have. Maybe I haven't. I'm old. I forget things. I prefer XP because it seems to reward players for whatever they do, rather than being railroaded to achieve goals they don't choose. I would agree with that. Rewarding them with XP. They can pretty much go out there and choose whatever they want, rather than the DM thinking to himself, right, okay, whether you're milestone leveling or milestone XPing, there is a difference. But whether the DM saying, right, okay, there's 1,000 XP for that goal or a level for that goal, this way the players can just decide. But the DM can always adjust to what the players do, but I do think XP gives a player more freedom.
It does give them freedom, yeah. It means that there is a tangible reward for one, attending the game, two, overcoming obstacles, and I don't mean just defeating enemies, but that's clearly a part of the main tenets. You've got then XP for exploration, XP for role playing, actually playing your characters, which is in AD&D, at least in second edition. I know they gave the concrete outline for how you can give XP based on class. Now that's a very old school thing, but that's because in the old school they very much turned around to the classes and said, well, the priest is someone who benefits the group. The spells are meant to be a bonus, a buff, to use modern terms. He is there to be a supporter. He's meant to do this. He's also at times meant to be the face for the group, especially when they're in front of socially higher people, that he will then be the bridge between the higher ranked and the group, who is expectantly mainly going to be peasantry, and you're going to have to find out who's going to be combat oriented, so on and so on and so on. So the XP is very good for rewarding, not just in terms of the group for what they achieve, but also the individual for playing a good role, for playing a good character, for being able to achieve something that would almost be designed for that class. So for that end, absolutely, the XP is a fantastic system that you can turn around and use for that. Now, the main grief that I can see with XP is that a lot of it is going to be based around, like, you get XP for killing monsters, and if you then go into the thieves, at least in the old school, there are a few things that will then benefit the thieves, benefit the wizards, benefit so on and so on. But you find that most of the concrete orientation towards what the XP is delved out by is actually going to be combat or using your powers. Again, using AD&D. So by the books, you're already funneled down, and it's then the DM's scope to find out how you broaden that out.
And that's where I think a lot of XP-based systems fail. Is I don't feel like any version of an XP system that I've seen for a long time, even in AD&D, the non-combat bonuses and all of the non-combat uses of XP, or how to adjudicate XP, weren't really as clearly defined, or at least if they were clearly defined, they weren't reinforced in products or future publications. It was, even if you're going through a monster book, I mean, it's telegraphed that combat is the big thing. And I know that treasure for XP was also a thing. But yeah, I think one of the big failings of those older systems is that while that was a thing, and we certainly used it, role playing bonuses, nifty thinking bonus, whatever, being clever, we would throw that out. But I don't feel like I was ever following a guideline as much as I would be when assigning like combat XP.
Mhm.
Let me give you an idea of how I did it for the recent Danger at Dunwater session. If you saw my videos recently, you'll be aware that my players completed that module in about 3 hours. I calculated how much the frogs, the panlung, and the giant crocodile were worth for XP. I calculated the value of the magic items they found and the treasure they found and their payment. And then because they'd achieved it cleverly, using diplomacy, minimum risk, I doubled it. So they got twice as much XP. So their bonus was the equivalent of what they'd accumulated on extra on top. And that's the way I rewarded that, because I thought they played extremely well.
Well, it depends on what it is that you want to, as you said, what do you want to go for as a DM? What's the main goal of it? I'm going to use my second edition group, and they set out their own goals. I have stopped preparing goals and missions. I am just running a world at this point. The world spins and turns and moves on. The players decide whether they want to engage, and sometimes they come up with some fantastic goals. Like they wanted to dismantle what was a den of slavers that they then learned were wizards who were causing enslavement. Well, that was a big thing that they had to do. They had to go out and defeat local resistance that they had built up. They had to make contact with an area that turned out to be ruled by chaotic neutral societies, and they had to deal with all these different factors, all of which then I took that event, played on it, and then later it turned out that these slavers weren't just there because it was a wonderful place to be. It was actually because the Yuan-Ti, the snake people, had decided to set up shop in the same region, and the Yuan-Ti, being the pragmatic little shits that they are, simply turned around and said, well, we need people. We need flesh people. We need weak people, and ideally pre-brainwashed, so we don't have to do that. So we're going to subcontract it over to this evil group.
Subcontract.
Well, yeah, of course you're going to be subcontracting it. I mean, hell, look at most of the pest controls that you see in the adventuring. Go out and kill, 100, every what's called goblin you kill, take their left ear, bring it back, and then that's a silver piece that you'll get for that. That is just subcontracting on a larger level, and that is what the different regions are going to be doing. It's just I'm applying this to the evil races of the opposition, and they're now doing that, and that's yeah,
and
that's
as an arrogant, evil race, Yuan-Ti would do exactly that sort of thing.
They'd always act through proxies.
Oh, absolutely. They act through proxies. They work in the shadows. They try to be as far away from the main battle, and then by the time that they're exposed, you're usually at the nick of time to stop them, or they are ready for you. And either case, you're cutting it close.
Yeah, even logistically, it makes sense because there's never going to be enough Yuan-Ti to really act to make big moves. So they're either going to have to act.
Oh well, that's where I have fun, because I like to play around with that, because I think charm, the school of magic charm, is a dangerous school.
Oh yeah, they can bolster their numbers, but
absolutely.
But they themselves are always going to be few.
Yeah, and where I was going to go with this wonderful little spiel is the fact that uncovering all of this is something that I believe you should be rewarded XP for.
Oh yeah,
these are all it's a major goal. Oh god, the Yuan-Ti's here, but the steps you took for uncovering the Yuan-Ti, now those are going to be big. In my group's place, they ended up having to merge in with the underground criminal world. They had to look at what was the logistics like in the area. Why were certain cities attacked during certain events of the campaign that the players played in? And most importantly, one of the players in real life remembered they actually acquired an item during one of the adventures that it wasn't magical, it wasn't important, it was sort of left to the side, and they just basically pulled it out, inspected it for the first time properly, and began seeing carvings that were unusual, that they couldn't recognize. And then they decided to roll the dice and use the scrying crystal ball that they had to see where it led. And it revealed that the auntie was involved somehow through some of these events. Now, that was a major XP thing. Actually, it was almost a milestone to reveal this sort of thing, because while it was second edition, I didn't just go, oh, everyone levels up. No, I gave a major boost instead of the traditional milestone. But it was a milestone in terms of the achievements that the players acquired themselves. I had preset the milestone that uncovering these, this enemy, just knowing that they're there, that's a victory. That's a major victory.
When people talk about milestone, I think people talk about there's two different types of milestone. There's one that's you've just gained a level, and one that's like you've reached a point in the story, have 2,000 XP.
Objective oriented
XP
assignment. Yeah.
Now,
Absolutely.
when I say I dislike milestone, it's the former that I dislike. Here's your level. I don't mind sort of like, okay, as you've just said, you've uncovered all this sort of stuff. You've learned all of this. You've really progressed, changed the world in a way in which really advances what I want you to do. So here's 2,000 XP. Well done. I don't mind that. That to me, that's a reward for achievement.
Yeah.
And XP is there to reward achievement. Whether that achievement is finding loot, peacefully getting past monsters, violently getting past monsters, getting around traps, solving puzzles, or just having a damn good game sometimes.
Yeah, I often assign role-playing bonuses to XP. It's like, all right, that this game, that scene you guys had in the bar with the half ogre, that was really awesome. Here's some XP.
Oh yeah.
Now, Mark makes a point here. Railroads and milestones, doesn't that mean it's actually not a role-playing game? Now, I've seen a number of arguments online about this. What is a role-playing game? And some people say, it's performing your role in a party. Other people say it's acting out your role. And it's both. It's both.
It's different.
It's getting into your character, and it's doing what your character would do, and it's performing your role as an adventurer. It's all of those things.
Yeah, the best description I've ever heard. And I think last stream I talked to Matt Colville had broken it down to like, little R, big R, and the little R is just thinking about what your character's role is and choosing to do what your character would do, not necessarily what you would do, or even necessarily what makes sense. I mean, especially if you're one of those people who's playing the low intelligence, low wisdom character, and you decide to, good example, we had back in 3rd edition, they sent the half-orc ranger ahead to scout this temple that was supposedly haunted, but it was actually just infested with like some sort of small humanoid. And he came back, and I described to him, he saw all these footprints everywhere. Ghosts shouldn't be leaving footprints, right? But he comes back to the party and he describes how he went up there and it was just full of all these tiny feet because he's low intelligence, right? And so the party is just horrified, thinking that up at this old ruin site, it's strewn with severed feet. The way he's describing it, that would be role playing. I mean, he didn't use a silly voice, and he didn't get up and pantomime it, and he didn't show up in costume, but he clearly played his character and assumed the role of that dumb half orc.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I think XP can be gained by the characters having learned something and the players having learned something. Now, I have written down a big long list of things to sort of discuss today, and one thing I want to just have a bit of a grumble about. I have an account on Reddit, and and when there's a lot of discussion on there about milestones or XP, and the amount of people that post to say they like milestones because they can't be bothered with the bookkeeping. And that really, really does make me despair.
Yeah, that's the
Because,
same players that don't want to do encumbrance or count arrows or spell components. Yeah.
and
I'm,
for me, it's even worse because how hard is it if for a DM, if you've encountered 15 goblins, you've killed 6 of them, they've forced the other 9 to submit or whatever, or persuaded them to leave, whatever you've done, you get the XP for the 15 goblins. 5th edition, 15 times 50, 750. You've got 3 players, 250 XP each. How hard is it to do that?
Oh yeah, it's not a lot.
I've just done it in 5 seconds. Now, you go back to AD&D, you can't all XP for hit points and magic items. Even that's not difficult. I'm looking into MERP at the moment. Have any of you ever seen the XP system in that?
It's been a while. I can't remember it at all.
Okay. 1 XP for every hit point damage you cause, 1 XP for every hit point damage you take, 1 XP for every mile you travel, experience for successfully performing game maneuvers, whether they be static or moving ones, depending on your skills, XP for causing critical hits, XP for taking critical hits, XP for killing the monsters, and at the end of it, 50% of all of that, the DM should then divide it all out and give personal awards to whoever contributed the most. That's bookkeeping.
Yeah, that's excessive.
It's just excessive. It's absolutely excessive.
But then again, MERP is excessive. So.
It can be at times. It can be. And I'm going to be doing a video on stripping that XP system out and redoing it at some point. But so when I see DMs that can't be bothered to do 15 times 50 for 15 goblins and divide it between 3 PCs, I just go, oh, what? What age are we living in?
so I think it's also time that you get a little counter. It's time that someone counters this. So, for when it comes to the milestone, yes, it is not. I agree with you absolutely wholeheartedly. In terms of the bookkeeping, anyone who knows basic math or has a calculator in their phone, which you do, you can get this over. Yeah, well, not all of us are that clever. I use Excel sheets. I'm not.
Sorry, I'm a nerd. T-shirt. So look.
No, exactly.
That's the T-shirt.
Anyway, but for when it comes to, for example, the milestones and divvying it up, let's take some of the modern day games, for example. Let's take I'm running Curse of Strahd. Now, Curse of Strahd is a very story-orientated module that's been set out. And if you open it up, you can even see that they've divided out all the different chapters for what the authors expect that the players would be in terms of their XP level, their power level, what sort of opposition that they should be facing, give or take. Now, this is just a way for you to take a pre-made story and say, right, by these points, it is advisable that the players reach to this point, and they will play within these sections, and they will be able to then be challenged, have fun, and then be engaged with what there is. And then by the time you come towards the end of that section, you should, had you done the legwork, the accountancy, and looked through it all, you should have hit the next milestone. Well, since there isn't exactly going to be a difference between having, the XP between that point and the end point, you can skip over that and just say, right, here you go. You've now achieved this because you have made the objective. You have progressed the story to a point of where the next part, you're going to be equally as challenged as before. You keep the same sort of, enjoyment going because, well.
I think you hit it on the head, though. That's when one of the things to say is Milestone, where it is, I think, appropriate and probably fits best, is in games or at gaming tables where you're running more of a story-oriented campaign. I mean, where the story is very
it's first and foremost
with the campaign, where you're not so much worried about the minutia, where you are worried about where you're thinking about the campaign in terms of chapters or Well, milestones. Yeah. So,
There are far better systems than any form of D&D for running that type of game, though.
that's true. But
Sure, but
the advantage
this
there is,
works.
yeah,
But
and that we
before,
get. Oh, sorry,
yeah,
sexist. We're
go
agreeing.
on.
You can this way you can run D&D, the familiar mechanical system, with players who don't necessarily, or even for a DM who doesn't want to be bothered. And I think it's just a tool in the box. It's not for everybody. I still, like I said, default to XP because that's just how I know it, and I do like the little trail of Reese's Pieces, that gets me through that gets my players through the game. But it's not for everybody. So
Just want to say hello to Graham. He's been lurking in there a little while.
Hello there. Sorry, I'm late.
That's quite all right. We all have lives. We all have lives. I do believe Omanal's mentioned he's going to join us at some point. So, okay, right. So, one of the reasons why people are using Milestone leveling at the moment is there is this belief that everybody needs to be at the same level, and that to spend time at different levels is unfair, and that players are going to have less fun if they have to spend an extra session at level 6 when everybody else is at level 7, and that sort of thing.
the tyranny of fun.
Well,
Yeah.
look at the system that you're using. AD&D is designed to not be fair. You are going to be at different levels. The thief is going to take off with a great acceleration right at the beginning, be several levels ahead of everyone else.
With the cleric chasing after him and the druid chasing after him as well. Yeah,
exactly. It's just going to be like
Four
that.
paladins there going in the background.
Exactly.
Heaven
But
wouldn't
it's
help
also,
you if you get hit by too many wights or wraiths.
what do you mean too many? There's never enough whites and wraiths. You
Well,
need
maybe as the
more.
DM, but
No, you need more.
your players may strongly disagree.
My players can learn to run.
Yeah, but no, I get you. We used to have basically when we ran AD&D, if you replace the character, we weren't cruel enough to like make you start at level 1, but we'd always put you at the bottom of the bracket for the XP when you came back with your new character. So like if everybody's at the high end of that level, you would start at the low end. It still puts you in different places, but yeah, it's 5th edition is definitely like and newer games in general, definitely focusing on the capital fun.
Now, I do run 5th edition, and in my games, all characters start at level 1.
Oh yeah.
So, and I've had first level characters in 5th edition games go out adventuring with 8th level characters. And as far as I'm concerned, it's up to the players to adjust accordingly.
5th edition is the best version of D&D to do that, though, because characters are hard to kill, but also the rest of the party has so much more in terms of resources to pool than they would in AD&D. So having that first level character there, he's not as squishy as he would be in AD&D, but B, he's also got a lot of backup. Everybody's got a lot that they can pour into keeping him alive. So.
That is true. That is true. And it's, to me, it is not a problem at all. And when I talked about with my players, I remember we were playing Castle Amber when this first really cropped up. And I'd converted Castle Amber to 5th edition. I need to do a review of Castle Amber. Have I done it?
And then they went ahead and did it for you, and so all your work was wasted.
Have I reviewed Castle Amber at any point? I can't remember whether I've done one or not. I think I must have done.
Focus, John. Jesus. Focus.
Yeah. Anyway, and the party's cleric died as a result of the magic jar in Castle Amber. The rest of the party were level 6 or 7. And I said to the player, "Well, so what are we going to do here again?" He goes, "I'm going to make it. I'll make a new character then." And he says, "Level 1." Okay, yeah, bring in a level 1 wizard then. And first level wizard came in and joined the rest of the party.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that the new crop, the new generation of gamers is missing out on when they're not dealing with some of the resource management or even the concept of like disparate levels in the party is that's drama. That's story. How often do you read a book or see a TV show where you've got the seasoned veteran and the young boy? Yeah, the seasoned veteran and the old drunk. Yeah,
Aragorn, Gimli, Legolas,
4 freaking
Gandalf,
hobbits
4 hobbits.
and a pony. That was probably
And a
more
pony.
badass than the hobbits. So
Yeah. Oh, good.
So, those hobbits were first level characters
probably 0.
at 0 at the beginning. Yeah, of course.
They're all just a bunch of like,
They
they didn't even have
actually,
jobs.
they actually survived the funnel in the Lord of the Rings world, thinking about that the ring wraiths were after them.
But you know how they survived? Throwing Boromirs at people trying to kill them.
Oh, that is.
Oh, poor Boromir. Poor Boromir.
It's a great character. Anyway, now
Plot
back
armor,
to
the
XP.
best armor.
Oh yeah, I mean hell. Oh,
Anyway,
let's-
Graham, you haven't given your opinion yet on XP. How do you like your XP?
Medium rare. I'll pretty much run it as it is, as it says in the basic and expert sets, and I've not had any problems. I quite enjoy the progression up through the ranks, because it's more of a challenge if you have to do a bit of adventuring before you get leveled up. So that's how I prefer to do it. I've played a bit of 5th edition in person, and that is more like leveling up when you come to a certain part in the story, like a chapter in the story, which I think also works well as well. And there's probably room for both. If you're in a campaign and you're expecting to get up to mid levels, medium levels, there may be room to do both things at different times. That's my thoughts really. Oh yeah, and as of different characters and classes leveling up at different times, well, that for me, that's baked into the number of experience points you need to level up anyway, because I think that's what they tried to do when they did that. Whether it's 100%, is arguable. It doesn't really bother me. I think it's more or less correct, and I've not had any major problems with it.
I mean, I will say about that. When I transitioned my 5th edition group to AD&D, one of the things they liked most about AD&D was the fact that the characters were advancing at different rates, and they loved the way the party dynamics shifted. And how different characters came into they had to protect the wizard to start off with, and suddenly the thief had got 20 hit points, and everyone else was at about between 6 and 10.
The thief needs those hit points because he's going to be hitting all those traps.
Oh yes, but they loved that. They loved the way it shifted and chopped and changed, and how it forced them to think.
Yeah. That's more of the drama though that I was talking about. That difference in level. It's also a bit of niche protection for characters, which is another thing that has kind of gone by the wayside. Is the wizard was doing the wizarding, the thief was doing the thieving, and nowadays, well, I got this feat, so now I can be the wizard. I can also do some wizardy, or I'm a wizardy fighter without having to multi-class, because I got that particular subclass. So there's like that, and also just that goes away. But XP that XP ladder system that really did reinforce that niche protection and build that drama too. Because when you have squishier characters in the party, you have to be strategic. You have to think.
Of course. Mm-hmm. And that adds to the game.
It does. But again, I think going back into the whole XP, I think what we're all talking about is that the XP that we usually delve out, either by the player or by the class. What we find is that that's usually something that you would expect in almost sandbox games. It's much easier to do it there because the players are going to be creative. They're going to be jumping up and around. And Milestone seems to be almost either you chop down the current adventures and objectives within the story to be achieve these things and you get major bonuses, or in modules you can almost chop those up to say at these stages you're expected to be level something at that point, so that you, as both the DM, know what kind of gradual XP feed you should be going before, if you want to go do it that way, or say, okay, you've now achieved this, or you've overcome this part. Here you go, you've now leveled up. But it's really dependent, I think, for what kind of game you want to be running. Because the systems, even just within D&D, they're going to be vastly different. The 3.5 and Pathfinder editions, they're all built with the idea that everyone is in the same level for XP. There's no variation, there's no difference, unless you start introducing level drain the way we all like it and hate it.
It was intended to be.
Exactly, I was going to say. The way St. Gygax intended it to be, an absolute bitch.
Yeah.
And
I think you can actually blend regular XP and Milestone into a campaign sometimes to pretty decent effect.
easy.
I feel that, like, for example, if you're trying to tell a story-based campaign, but you want to function on XP normally, but let's say the story or the the winter has passed, and so like you're okay, cool. So now we've had a big span of time go by, have a level, because you've been doing stuff in that time. It's just not worth playing. Or especially, let's say you're doing a campaign that is a war, and you're really only going to be playing through key moments. We could assume that the party has been fighting that whole time, or narratively. So maybe it would make sense. I mean, like I said, you can use it mishmashed in there to help that story if that's your intent. If you're just doing pure dungeon crawly old school stuff, XP is your friend. So.
My next point on my list here was that people complain that using XP punishes people for not turning up, and that is wrong.
And that's why you put your characters in the hands of another player you trust and take a percentage of what you should have been earning and accept that you might die.
As far as I'm concerned, I'm not punishing anybody who doesn't turn up. I'm merely rewarding those who show the commitment to turn up. There's a difference.
Yeah.
There's a complete difference. If I'm willing as DM to put the time in to prepare a session and be there week in, week out, and if I'm not going to be there, the players will get tons of warning, then I'm going to reward people who turn up. And
when I've run more stable campaigns, that's been the way to go about it. But like right now, all my players we're lucky if we can actually get everybody together to play, so I'm not going to punish them for not being there. But I have actually in the past run it to where, like, if you weren't there, you got half the XP that everybody did. So you're not punished, but you're still not making as much. You're not making maximum.
When we play online over Roll20, I mean, we play as long as there were 3 or 4 players available, we will play. And the players who can't turn up, if they want their characters to be involved, they give control to another player, and they'll get the XP for monsters, treasure, whatever, but they won't get any of the bonuses that will go out.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're not there to do role playing and stuff, you're not going to get role play bonuses.
No, exactly.
And those are always individual awards in my games anyway. Yeah. So it's like,
go on.
So then that's a 5th edition game, and but then I give XP for all different sources in that, but I have pretty much trebled the amount of requirements to get to levels. So
fair enough. I turn around and I've said, if you can make it, I'm not blaming you for having a life outside of the game. I know my players, if they will be attending. I know them that they want to attend. If there are events that takes place that are either prior commitments, that I respect that, and they should be respecting that as well. Then fair enough. Turn around to another player and say, right, um, Charles, I need you to run my character. You take control of that. Well, I still reward 40% of the XP. It's then Charles' responsibility to make sure that he keeps the paperwork in order, so that if he's running a wizard, well, how many spells did you cast? Have you read over his spells? So I'm encouraging my players to have a buddy that they can turn around and be like, okay, well, I run your character, you run my character, and then vice versa, so that the person who can't make it, 40% of the XP is still going to be 60% is still going to be given to them, but the 40% is then going to be handed over to the other player, rewarding them for that character's actions and benefits. And I will give the other player the full, the wizard that casts spells and all that. That's going straight over to the other player because they put in the work and they took the risks. The reason for why I still give the player who didn't attend 60%, well, that player has now understood I absolutely will be killing that character should the opportunity be arising, and it is down for another person for that to happen. I have seen characters go from 80 HP down to 16 because the buddy that they paired themselves up with did not know how to play that class and decided to use them as a meat bag instead. I saw that and I abused that because why wouldn't I? That's an opportunity right there. And it's something that the players agreed.
I don't so much punish players for not turning up in any way, shape, or form, as far as I'm concerned. No. But my other players, this is just a little bit of a little anecdote. I know we're going slightly off topic here, but when we play over Roll20 and we give control of the character sheets to the other players, they also get complete editing rights on that character sheet in Roll20, and players have come back to find their character sheets have been entirely translated into Arabic, or every noun on their character sheet has been changed to the word cock and things like that. So it's so they get completely trolled by the other players, and I find it highly amusing.
I would get so angry at that. My God, I would get so angry. It would motivate me never to lose a session because I would never want that to happen to me again.
There's an incentive for you.
That is a very strong incentive.
Yeah, but they will do that. But they all know that they will do that.
Yeah, that's different in styles, I suppose. But then again, I don't really go for the player seat these days.
Right. It's a pity DK isn't here because I was going to bring up this is almost a little grumble. We're currently playing in a DCC game on a Saturday night, alternate Saturdays, and DK is running it, and we've got a not very martial party, and it's quite a small party, and the way XP is being given out is, if we beat an encounter, we're given 1 or 2 XP each. Well, I prefer the way D&D would do it. For example, that encounter is worth 500 XP in terms of the monsters and the treasures or whatever. You split it between everybody who's there. It seems that the value of the encounter is being adjusted by the number of players. It's almost like saying, okay, if you beat all these skeletons, you'll get 100 XP each. If there's 1 of you there, you'll get 100 XP. If there's 10 of you there, you'll all get 100 XP. And it's as a result, we're more than 10 sessions into the campaign. We haven't even gained 2nd level yet. We're going that slowly. It's ridiculous, but it's still good fun. So I just wanted to have a little bit of a grumble about DCC's XP system there.
It's kind of odd.
But DCC, from what I can see at the very least, it's not like it's a fast-paced game anyway. Well, it's fast-paced, but in terms of the leveling, it's not. You're not going high up into the levels. it does end at one point from what I remember, and even then, like
Isn't
it's
DCC
more,
all the way up to like level 10 and that's about it or something like
yeah,
that? It's really designed to keep people in that prime adventuring window where things are fun and most campaigns die.
yeah, because it's the whole, yeah, it's the same in like Shadow of the Demon. Well, Shadow of the Demon Lord does XP very differently, and it's actually 100% milestone based, but they change what the milestone is.
We have a Doof. Doof, I'm guessing you want to say something about DCC.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the DCC EXP system, actually. And I don't know why you guys are leveling so slowly.
We're getting about 2 or 3 XP a session, that's why.
Yeah.
Is
You
that
do play
because
shorter
they're not
sessions.
getting into fights, or why is that? Are they very close?
We are avoiding fights because we're a party of 2 clerics and a thief most of the time, or a cleric, a mage, and a thief.
Henchmen.
So if you did kill something and get some treasure, you'd get quite a big share of that.
Well, when that's happening, we're getting like 1 XP each.
That is weird because the greater the risk, the greater the EXP amount you get in DCC.
There have been a few fights that we've got 2 XP for.
And no,
Aye,
This might just be DK's way of doing it.
it sounds very DK for him to be stingy with the XP and be like, "Oh, you didn't do this. Well, you shall not have this. I shall keep it away from you."
If one guy is close to dying, it should be 3 EXP according to the rules, right?
So,
I mean,
shall we fling that at DK next time we see him?
I don't know. The same. You can also get EXP from non-combat in DCC, just as long as you're taking risks.
Yeah, but this is then down to like the pace that the DM wants to set, and if
Yeah, true.
DK wants to set, if DK wants to set a slow, grueling, methodical, and brutal game, there you go. Then that's what you're there for. But then again,
It could be why he's allowed us to get some hirelings and henchmen type characters along with us, so we will actually go near combat. My character now has a dominatrix that follows him around, who happens to be a 2nd level warrior. But that's DCC for you.
yeah,
DCC is just weird, and it's supposed to be weird.
I know, and I still can't recover from it. It's just
It's the poster child for that weird bent that of opinion and perception of the OSR, where somehow it was all gonzo all the time, and they just distilled that into an RPG. So
Yeah, it's good fun anyway. It's a break from the norm. And
it's a flavor of gaming, and that's what I always, that's why I have 8 million RPGs and play them every so often, because it's a flavor of game. Like I think we talked about in one of the previous streams, I would love to run a fantasy game using the Call of Cthulhu system, because that would be a gritty, dark fantasy game, and I think that would be the better way to run it, where a fight is going to be something you really have to think about, because it could end you real quick.
I mean, you bring up Call of Cthulhu at a very good time, because now, since we are branching into alternative XP, Call of Cthulhu, I mean, as a system, basically focuses on your skills more than anything else. You pass your skill, you put a check mark next to it, you keep on playing, and at some point you then roll. I think it's either at the end of the session or at the end of the campaign. Or
it's the end of sort of the arc. Because it's vaguely expressed in there, because it's supposed to be at the end of the. For big campaigns, it would be at the end of the current scenario. But if you're just doing like a one-off, it would be not at the end of the session, because it's supposed to be kind of when you're done, when you finished what you're doing. And I do love how you have to roll. You basically have to fail an XP check when you're checking for skills.
But that's then to show like it's more difficult for you to improve once you reach a certain stage because
Exactly.
you become so good at something at that point, and it's just it's harder for you to reach that next level of genius or
Yeah.
expertise or what have you. But that's a system I quite like because then it brings out it has a wonderful marriage of the mechanical munchiness and the role playing because it really delves into great details, at least in 1920s and modern day Call of Cthulhu, where you can really customize to have that character who has got his profession and his hobbies. And I can really make some creative characters.
It also rewards you for having your character do things that's not necessarily in your build. Your
Yeah.
like I am a psychiatrist, but I had to shoot a gun and kill a ghoul, and now I'm better at guns. Or everybody else was unconscious, and I had to pick the lock, and lo and behold.
Yeah.
I'm just going to quickly dive in. Omanal has mentioned RuneQuest, which is basically Call of Cthulhu's percentage-based system in a fantasy game. That's worth a look if you want to try that sort of thing. And as I mentioned, I think it was last time, Chris, who did my old Geek background thing, he wrote a game called Age of Shadow, which is quite a Tolkien-esque fantasy game based on that same percentage system.
RuneQuest is still kind of high fantasy, just with a different bent to it. But there is Cthulhu Dark Ages, which is a great footprint.
Yeah, that as well. Yeah.
Although it's 6th edition, not 7th edition, but that's such an easy fix. It's not a thing. But
just as a slight just going to mention here, my next note on my sheet was different in skill-based systems. Fine works for those. So and Saxius, you before I even got to that note, you dived into skill-based systems. So
how dare I?
You preempted me.
Another interesting skill-based system would be like the old West End Games Star Wars system, the D6 system. Very low XP count because you really didn't get XP at the end of the session. There was sort of a little questionnaire. Did you accomplish the goal? Did you do this? Did you do that? And you got 1 or 2 points for all of that. And then at the end, you I think the maximum you could ever get in one session is like 7 points. And then that would be applied to your
that
skills.
a step further with Paranoia, filling out those end of mission forms in Paranoia if you ever got to the end of the mission.
Never looked at Paranoia.
No. I keep on being told about Paranoia, and the more I hear about it, the more I just sit there and go, why?
I don't think I could play it. But then again, I'm one of those guys who doesn't like a lot of wacky, goofy in my games.
Yeah.
So.
I don't like a lot of wacky goofy. I'll play a few hours of DCC a fortnight, and in the same way, I will play a few hours of Paranoia every few months or so, for something completely different, and as a way of just getting everything out of your hair. Paranoia is insane.
That said, I did have a lot of fun playing the old Toon RPG. So.
Oh, I hated that. I thought it was one of the worst RPGs I've ever played.
We had fun with it. It was fun because it's just Looney Tunes. But actually, my favorite XP system, if we're talking alternate XP systems, is not a skill based, and it's not a normal XP system. Would be the original 1980s Marvel superheroes RPG with the dynamic XP system, where you got karma as your primary XP, but there was a secondary XP of popularity. But karma was really cool because you could spend it in play to do things.
I was going to wave that in front of the screen, but I just realized I've taken it up to my attic because I don't use it at the moment.
And it was neat because karma also, the whole karma system was defined enough to where, yes, things in fights could give you karma. But also
saving people, being the hero gave you karma.
But it even went down to they had a great example. But one of the things that system is wonderful for is examples, because it's all trying to teach you how to role play the Marvel comic book universe way. And like Peter Parker gets +5 karma for having tea with Aunt May. But if he forgets to have tea with Aunt May, he loses 10. And that was the other thing. You could lose karma for negative things. Like kill somebody and don't have the casual killer ability on there, you lose all your karma. Like you just like your character goes into a depression and you lose all your XP.
Spider-Man doesn't kill people.
Wolverine
Peter
does.
Parker
He has
goes
a casual
depressed.
killer ability, but it was a good system, and it even like that the power, like the power stunt ability was you'd spend X number of karma every time you wanted to try your power stunt, and then every time you tried it, you could roll to see if it became a permanent thing, like you could do. But but then again, at a certain point, if you had tried it enough times to where you could have just bought that power, you got it anyways, because you're like, all right, you've now tried that power stunt like what 5 or 10 times. It's been a while. You can have it. You've spent the XP, so you weren't like SOL on that one.
Omanal mentions about here, players finished a mission in Paranoia. Yes, I've had players finish a mission. I've finished a mission as a player in Paranoia, but there's a difference between finishing a mission and completing a mission. We finished and failed dismally, and then had to all try and implicate everybody else for causing the failure. And that's one of the best bits of the game, when you all sort of the survivors shuffle into the debriefing room and then try and point the finger at everybody else for cocking up and trying to avoid the blame.
Another system that's skill based would be World of Darkness. It is heavily skill based in terms of that, and when it comes down to the XP, I mean, it's got a very different way of handing out the XP, basically being down to, did the group overall have fun? Was any major accomplishments done this session? Did someone achieve something extraordinarily, big and defining for the potential arc that you are playing through? And then you go through these questions. It's less about, the actual, combat, passing skills or any of that, but it's more when you played, did all of this accumulate in together towards achieving fun, and did you achieve things that you feel progressed the story? And I think one of them is even just asking, did people show up? Now I look at that and go, yes, they show up, because I cracked the whip and put the fear of God into my players, because they cannot not show up.
So one thing that really intrigued me in terms of, I guess you could call it an XP system, is something I see in a lot of board games, and that's the Doom clock that they often have as a mechanic for campaign tension level.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that would be a fun thing to implement into RPGs as a sort of a form of quantified DM XP almost.
I have found systems, Warhammer 40,000 Dark Heresy 2nd edition has got a very specific meter where you start at 50%, basically. It's meant to be how conspicuous or inconspicuous you can be. But I like the system, so I often use it for whenever the players are trying to do something, either being subtle or if they are doing things that are working for or against the stability of the region. And it sort of goes back and forth depending on the actions of both the players, the NPCs, and just the regional factors. It's a fun little thing to bring in, and it's something I play with at the back, but it's hard to really sort of bring it into a mechanical form that the players notice. For me, it's just something I keep tabs on for myself.
Right. Moving on to my next point on here. Now, all the next ones I've got are all to do with various versions of D&D and how the style of game has changed due to the XP system.
Yeah.
I'm going to begin with basic D&D. For me, the biggest problem with basic D&D was its reliance on the classic go in, get the gold XP system, which I think is great in terms of the focusing the players on performing the classic adventuring task of get loot, become heroes, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
But there's nothing in basic D&D really to spend it on. By the time you get to about 4th or 5th level, you've got like 10,000 gold. If you play something like the Lost City, you're absolutely brimming in gold by the time you get to 4th or 5th level. Now, I think AD&D fixed that with the whole training system. How much experience have you guys got with playing original basic expert or BECMI D&D, and how did you get around the excess gold issues? You haven't played it.
None.
I think, Doof, you
for
asked
me,
me
it was
this
always such a
question
weird.
in Discord once.
Ask what question? How do you get people to spend gold or something
In
along
basic
those
D&D,
lines?
yes.
Yeah, well, I am running a West March currently, and
Yeah.
this far it hasn't been a problem since they're still hovering around 3rd level. And we since it's basic fantasy, we do have the equipment emporium, which does give you quite a few things to spend gold on, but you still have this problem where gold isn't really worth anything. It doesn't feel as significant as it could be.
Basic fantasy, I've seen DMs go out of their way to find ways for gold to be expendable. Like, there are now wizards that will allow you to buy, these scrolls, or clerics that will just hand out these potions of healing. There's just other ways to just increase the level of fantasy in exchange for money, to keep the sort of like money comes in, money goes out sort of deal. But
Yeah, I don't remember it ever being much of a problem. I mean, my early experiences with D&D were a weird mashup of basic and AD&D because we jumped in and not realizing that they were different. But and so, but all the players in the groups I was in, we were always really big on strongholds and going above and beyond dungeon crawling. So building those strongholds, recruiting those mercenaries to protect it, building towns was always a thing we were doing. So for us, expending gold was never an issue. So I think a lot of that just comes down to your players and the DM. I mean, opportunities, opportunities can arise too. Like you could easily have a DM do something along the lines of, hey, the king has granted you land because you're at X number of levels, and if you can pacify it and build a stronghold, he'll install you as X title. Motivate your players. Now they're expending money. They're going on quests because they're going to go ahead and do some monster stomping to clear the area, but then you're giving them a reason to spend it. And Saxis's idea is really good too. It's building an economy for your game world that requires them to spend money. It's that magic, maybe it's not as common, and when you find it, it has to cost a lot. So
Did you say hello, Oman Al? Not seen you for a few streams. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well after traveling to see the giant mega floods. So that was a 3-week journey. So that was, and of course, somehow my son survived the whole trip without me strangling him. But other than that, no, I've been doing pretty well.
Good. I see in chat people have mentioned. I was specifically referring to basic D&D for this one because I think AD&D, the whole training system in AD&D deals very well with using up that gold, especially at low levels. It keeps the characters poor until levels 5 or 6-ish, which to me is exactly as it should be.
Well, you know what? I've got the OSE, and I don't know if that's 100%, but I could have sworn there are ways to spend money in basic and expert.
OSE is a faithful port of BX. That's its whole point.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to figure out is because I got it, and I thought it had things in there, but a lot of it also just depends on buying your normal stuff. And to be and I think a lot of us didn't do this back 40 years ago, but when you really look at it, the expectation is you would hire retainers, you would be building things. So your money was sort of saved up in the background more to, hey, once I get up to 9th level, I can build this fortress or whatever. And so I think that there's some of that aspect in there. As I'm trying to bring up this here.
I remember our group was often starting to try and build those things even before we got to the levels where it says you can, because it says at those point you're like granted something, like, well, who's to stop me? I've got gold. I'm going to build it here, and I can hire mercenaries to protect it. I mean, sure, I've got to convince a bunch of 5th level fighters why they should follow my 3rd level ass, but
well, and then the other part is, looking down here, depending on how much, and to be fair, I hate saying this, I probably played a good 4 years before I read the rule that said 1 gold equals 1 XP. I feel like, oh, that would have made it much nicer.
How did your players ever reach 2nd level?
Well, the problem is that if you actually go in the back for 1st edition and you start reading where it gives the lair treasure, that's how I got characters up to 40th level way too fast. And after that, I have been Mr. Stingy on everything. But I think that sometimes you learn more from your mistakes than you do from your successes. And now, reviewing it back in the day, I'm beginning to really appreciate BX. Not as much AD&D, oddly enough. That's why I did not like Canada. At the time, I loved it, but now I look back on it and said that was just too much power creep. It didn't really add that much more to the game, except favor players that just wanted more power. There were certain things I think that it did well, but it was one of those that really became more of a Monty Hall aspect to it, rather than saying, you know what, this is how you make the game better. I did like cantrips and a few of the other spells, but a lot of it was just, I think, bad. And the other part is, if you want to spend money, you always had things like ships, getting specialty. I'm looking right down here where it talks about, river boats and galleys. A war galley, 60,000 gold. So then you have to staff it. So there are always ways to spend that money. Plus, you had to spend money on your spells. I could have sworn in here, as I'm flipping through the rules right now, that they had something in here about training. But I don't have my original book from way back then. Sorry,
I don't remember any training rules in Base D. So,
and I think
certainly not.
I also think, to be fair, is I got the rules at the same time, and you kind of think the two are compatible when they're actually two different games.
Yeah, that was my problem.
Yeah,
I was thinking the same.
You're 8th level. Well, I'm sorry, you're 8 years old. You read the rules as much as you can, and you're like, oh, I can do this, and this is so cool, and for things like that. So I don't think that I would have that problem now, being much older, of dealing with the money, because you look at it, it says like an alchemist is 1,000 gold pieces per month. An engineer is 750 gold pieces per month. Players at higher levels will drain that very, very quickly.
Yeah. But yes, there are. I was just wondering ways people have done it. My own experience of running basic and expert, I moved very quickly from basic to AD&D, and I was very, very green to D&D at that time. I look back now, and I do see the built into the rules there is a shortage. But yeah, obviously, if you are investing your players into your game world and drilling in the need for hirelings, henchmen, all sorts of retainers and whatever, then yes, of course there are ways. I do like AD&D's way of doing it, and since I've been going back and re-examining all those old modules, it has given me a new appreciation of how they've been designed, in that the vast majority of them have got the balance of XP to gold to enemies to magic, and they've got it pretty much spot on, with the expectation that most adventures the players will gain a level, and within the adventure, if they're thorough enough, they will find enough treasure to train for that level. And I'll be able to see which adventures have been very well designed in that sense. Salt marshes against the cult of the reptile god, very well designed in terms of the amount of XP and treasure that's in there. Whereas the Desert of Desolation series, terrible for that. Tracy Hickman completely ignored the XP expectations when designing those adventures.
Though, when I'm reading through a lot of it, though, and starting to reflect on it, it was supposed to be anywhere from 2 to 3 game sessions per level, or it could even go as far as up to 10 game sessions per level. So I agree with you. Is that a lot of times I wanted to basically get the characters up 1 level per module, which I guess kind of gets into that milestone aspect. I just, when I look at Milestone, I guess I have a different view of it, which is I don't want characters to advance unless they accomplish something big. And I don't care what it is. But I want them to at least have a task, because I've played 5e games where it was just the number of times we showed up, we leveled up. And that was actually to lower, my friend actually liked that better than just giving out XP, because they advanced very quickly when they were doing the murder hoboing aspect with his games. But we both agreed that we would rather see people actually accomplish something, and then that counts as like a milestone. And then as you start going through, and then you can always add more. I really wish D&D had cut the XP by about 1/100th. So you only need 15 XP points, which is very similar to what DCC has. I don't understand why you have to have 1,500 XP in there. To me, I like the DCC system and several others. Palladium being a really good example. Is Palladium didn't care what level you were. It was your challenge. So a first level character that fought, let's give an example. Like if you fought an equivalent of Darth Vader at first level, that you would get far more XP for defeating him than you would if you were, 15th level and fought him. It's just because it's a threat based aspect. So for a minor threat, it might be 25.
Middle Earth is similar to that. If you're low level and you kill a high level thing, you'll get more XP than you were if you're higher level.
Well, what I liked about it is it wasn't even based off of XP. It was based off a threat. I heard years ago where they were talking about characters fighting off kobolds in some adventure, and the players hated it because the kobolds were deadlier than most of the equivalent monsters. And it's because they went into the kobold's lair and they were doing traps and hiding and all sorts of things. And in Palladium, that would count as a major threat, whereas something that they could kill easily might be a minor threat. And they give you XP for outthinking a monster as well. So it was a defeat. You didn't have to necessarily kill it.
Yeah, well, I've always given XP for outthinking monsters. So you get XP for the encounter, however you deal with it.
I am surprised that even 5th edition kept that very granular XP system, with the hundreds and thousands of XP. I know wargaming, the other side of my hobbies, has been moving kind of away from that in a lot of systems where you're not building a 2,000 point army anymore. You're building like a 200 or maybe even a 20 point army. You're having the same number of miniatures and same kind of units. It's just like, do we really need to get the numbers up that high to make it work? Similar with XP. I think that's what you're saying there. It's like, do we really need to have 2,000 XP for a dragon, or is that dragon worth 20?
Let's actually move on to, because we're going it by editions, aren't we? So we've done about the basic experts and the original. We've touched on about the AD&D and the XP that's going to be given out by the classes. That's a lot more diverse now, as they've found ways for that the XP is going to be invested in.
I mean, I've got second edition next on my list, and you've already mentioned that, and that was where it started to shift in terms of giving out XP for. At this point, XP for gold became optional, training became optional, and it started to hand out XP for fighters got XP per hit dice of creature killed. Clerics got XP for casting spells to further their mythos. Mages got XP per level of spell cast. Thieves got XP for using their skills. And again, thieves accelerated really quickly. But they put themselves in harm's way to do that.
Yep.
And there are parts of that I like, but I do think it changed the tone of the game away from the classic dungeon delve, get the loot and get out, to a bit more of what you do while you're there. I quite like that old idea of get in and get out, minimum of risk.
Well, I think XP also encourage, and it depends on, I've noticed this for all the systems, XP encourages certain actions by players. Mm-hmm. And in first edition, and I'm just referencing that, it was almost as advantageous to talk to the monster, because some monsters didn't understand on how much something was worth. Oh, it's just a gold piece, but you like food, I'll hand you food, and you're like, I'll trade you all this food for this. Like, oh, okay. Whereas in the second edition, you didn't get any more money for getting that for a gold statue or something. You got it for killing the monster. And so then it discouraged players from really doing as much as the morale. And I remember it also got rid of a lot of the morale. Charisma became much less useful. It just felt like the whole, I know there was a reaction adjustment, but it felt a lot less useful than it did in first edition, where it encouraged players to actually talk to the monsters or to avoid combat, because by doing that, you may not get the XP, and you didn't get as much XP for it. And so I think that caused a major shift among the players in that aspect.
It did. We've lost Satchers by the looks of things. I'm not sure what's happened there.
He says his computer froze.
His computer's froze.
Yeah, yeah. He popped that up on the Discord.
Oh, right. Okay. Elfbait, did you have any much experience with second edition?
To me, it just kind of blurred together with AD&D. We took the stuff from that and just kind of ran with it as extended AD&D. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we had already been doing XP very differently than in the books by doing role playing bonuses and the like for XP, but it was still XP based. I do remember not liking hit points caused and spells cast and all of that, because that just seemed a little too fiddly. Like, because the players would have, or the DM would have to remember in combat, in the course of play, to note that stuff down, and invariably it came down to the end of an adventure or a session, and you're like, well, how many hit points did you? Oh, I don't know. What spells did you cast? I think I cast healing, and
yeah, it did become a little bit more fiddly in that sense, and there's something to be said for at first edition being simpler, where you just have a list of all the monsters you've encountered, list of all the treasures you've found. That's it.
Yeah, well, and by second edition, the players you're starting to see a little bit more on the player's plate with non-weapon proficiencies, mm-hmm. aka skills, and then even like their kits and stuff like that. Having a little more special abilities, more stuff on the character sheet, more things that they have to remember.
Yep, that is true. That is true. But I mean, it's the DM, as far as I'm concerned, it's the DM's responsibility to deal with the XP. It's not the players. I'd like the players to focus on the game. I'll deal with all that behind the scenes, all the XP. But people vary. People differ. Someone said something earlier about giving out levels as an adventure at key moments, and I think part of the design of original modules was that if you completed a module, you were considered to have achieved something major because they were hard. They were an achievement.
Well, I remember most of them in their introduction would say something along this module is designed for da 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 da. players should gain 1 to 2 levels in this adventure. It's they would set an expectation. So I think there was always this mindset that I guess
They'd be
there
made to
are
work for it.
milestones, but but
You will work for it.
yeah.
You will work.
It
very
really
hard.
makes you question, when you're playing it, you're like, well, it says you should have gone up 2 levels and none of you have even gone up 1. If you get through it, and it's like, you're looking at that, I'm like, well, either I as the DM failed or you as the players really did well.
All you players did not kill enough of the monsters and grab all their treasure. Go back in there and clear every room just like you're supposed to.
Exactly. And there was that point in time where we were completionist adventurers where like, there's still 3 rooms left in this dungeon. We've got to make sure we get them all. You never know what could be lying in that pile of dung and rot grubs.
Well, and that's... Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So my party, most of the casualties in our AD&D campaign came purely because of their completionist attitude.
Yeah, I've had sessions grind to a halt because my players are like, and this is more modern games, even in 5th edition, they're like, well, we need to go back and check that room, and the rest of the party's like, no, we don't need to, but you don't know what's there. I'm like, yeah, but you're right, we don't know what's there. Maybe that's where the lich is. Yeah. one of the ones that really stands out, the last campaign I would actually play in was one my brother was running, and we took this stronghold, and in the basement was a door that when we like listened at it, there was screaming and howling and stuff behind it and stuff. And then we tried to open it and something lunged through the darkness towards us. So we closed it we fully occupied that castle and started rebuilding it, and nobody had yet to go in. And like, they're like, I'm not going in there.
Gonna start get the limestone, the stone.
And then eventually it was hilarious. Eventually it just became like that room in the basement where you threaten to throw people because you could take them down. You're like, listen to the door, and they'd be like, rah! And they're like, oh my god, what's in there? Do you want to find out? No, I'll tell you what you need.
You know what's funny is while we're talking about this, you can actually do almost the opposite, which is you can put a reward of, I will pay whatever adventuring party wants to go explore what's behind this door.
Exactly.
And you as players, you're like, well, you know what? We got all this gold. What are we going to do with it? Hey, we'll stake something up there and say, 20,000 gold for whoever wants to clear that room.
Oh
Yeah,
my!
that's
Are you
what-
suggesting that the players subcontract adventures out? No.
I'm pretty sure.
That's a great idea.
We never did find out what was in there, but I'm pretty sure it was some sort of high level undead. Which, yes, in 5th edition isn't as nasty as it would have been in AD&D, but still nasty enough to where we didn't want to bother.
I mean, so again, this is just how I am as a DM. One of my players made an offhand comment that he'd definitely pay people if they could get him a griffin egg, and I looked at him and went, really? So you do that? It's like, yeah, what? I like that. Real life, 6 months passes by, and then all of a sudden, they've just finished this great adventure. They're coming back to level 8. It's been a long, good run for them. And then these 6 shabby, bloodied, mangled people step up to them, and they're like, you're Duncan. You owe us 300 gold each. And he's like, the hell I do, getting up ready to cast Fireball to murder them, until he realizes, oh wait, they're standing there with eggs, and that they're like, we've got the griffin eggs that you wanted.
Yeah,
it's taken like months in real life. In the game, and I ran several, for my sake of fun, funnel games with DCC where all these random NPCs just had to rush up this hill against this family of griffins who just went,
We're not having this.
Exactly. It was fun for me, especially since that area, if the players ever go back there, will be littered with bodies in various forms of decay.
But I think that's the way it should be done, especially if you run multiple groups. And by my understanding, that's what the D&D used to do, was that one day equaled real life, where you'd have different groups just running through. It was like random players would come in every six
The
six.
whole West Marches thing. Whoever shows up is who you run.
Yeah, well, exactly. And then they would run them through an adventure, and then whoever. But it still had an ongoing story. And I said, well, that works out pretty well if you already have a set world. You can let these other groups. You don't even have to bring them close to each other. But then, like, oh, you guys got the slavers. Oh, wait a minute, you guys suddenly allowed the Oasis. And so they can hear stories from afar without necessarily interacting.
Well, they were saying in some of the stuff I read, it even would crop up things of competition where like a party would not complete an adventure or would get a rumor and another party would get to that treasure before they did. And then you got these parties actually conflicting with one another. And I can't help but think that that's why there are so many encounters that are another adventuring party in modules, because, as we started getting away from the West Marches, but hey, when I got back into 5th edition, and talking about Saxius and Subcontractors, the first group I started running when I got back into D&D with 5th edition, I should say, they hired interns to do stuff for them while they were away on adventure. They didn't want to stop adventuring, so they went to the local wizards college and hired a bunch of students to sit there and go through the scrolls and do their basic potion mongering and stuff like that. It's like, okay, by the time we get back, I expect 10 healing potions to have been made. Here's the money. Here's the shop. Here's what, if you need to, the herbalist in the city, go do the thing. We'll be back. And eventually that led to an adventure as one of the interns got in trouble with one of the local cults and stuff like that. But it was fun. They hired interns. It created drama. It freed them to go adventuring.
Yeah.
Well,
And that solves the lack of use for gold issue that 5th edition has as well.
Oh yeah, because they went shopping for real estate in a city, in a game city, and I'm like, okay, well, this is city real estate, so it's going to be pricey. So they bought this old manor house, and the campaign fizzled. But I had the plots like, why was the house empty? Maybe that'll come up someday. What if the owner shows up and goes, hey, this is my house? And they're like, but we bought it. He's like, but I never sold it.
Yeah.
Or what's in that door in the basement, right?
and the other part is that for like high level items, like low level items, I don't have any problems if they farm out like some potions. But it's very easy of your interns going, hey, we found this recipe, but we need this one item, and it just happens to be like a 9th level monster before we can create these potions for you. And it then encourages those players to go out and adventure so they can get materials to build their magic items. So yeah.
So later in the other editions, once we start moving into like 3rd edition, specifically 3.5, they introduced something that many players, when I asked them, did not want to do. Pay XP for making magical items.
I heard about that. I didn't play enough of 3rd or 3.5 to get to that because I didn't like it as a system. But I heard about that, and that's interesting. But there's part of the problem with those editions where there was a power expectation in terms of having certain items, which that's one of the things that put me off 3rd 3.5. It was an arms race, and you had to keep up with the arms race.
No, yeah, totally. But it's funny since we're talking about the XP and what's coming with it. Then once we start moving into 3.5, they almost turned around and went, well, what, aside from level drain, why would anyone spend XP? How can we get rid of XP? Well, we can have the wizards and the clerics take their experience to basically mold it into make the magical item that they desire as a sort of shortcut. Now that was very quickly removed once we started getting into Pathfinder, because they turned around and just said, no, we're just going to do gold. Just increase the cost of it rather than have you lose potential levels. Because let's say you're level 9, 10, you can make magical items now. Brilliant. You now need to go on an adventure and kill, I don't know how many hundreds, if not thousands of monsters just to get enough XP for making that item. And that's before we go into, if anyone remembers those charts for challenge level or challenge rating versus level. Now suddenly you can't just go out and farm, 12,000 goblins at level 12. No, they're worth nothing. They're literally worth 0 XP. You
Yeah,
can't even.
that's that whole threat-based XP right there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Now that's suddenly where this comes in, and it's just like, well, we want you to only go up. You've got a mechanical gun to your back. You're moving forwards. You will be going into the astral planes. You will be going out and facing the dreadlords of the fire planes. And yes, you are traveling into the shadow plane because you're not finding monsters of CR levels 12 and beyond on the material plane. Not at least, you're going to go down, way down, into the Underdark.
But you
Where
know,
they're-
I
on.
hate doing that in certain ways. And again, I'm going to go for different systems. I know we're all focusing on D&D. I remember that for Shadowrun where they would do it, and part of the problem I have with that, especially if the only people that can make it are the wizards and clerics, they're the ones that are preventing from going up in levels, and fighters and thieves can go up just fine. And I think that's an unfair system from that aspect. And I don't mind, and I guess this is going to, if players can do it to invest into something, but like you said, to me, XP is about learning and becoming better. And I don't want characters that sit around and do nothing, which is where, if you look at sometimes the milestones, is if you show up a certain number of times, you get a level. I don't like that. I don't like the purely, if you fight everything. I want players to actually achieve something to go up levels. I don't mind you getting XP, but you have to complete a milestone to go up a level and something. It's the kind of the way that I like it. But I don't want players suddenly going, okay, you sit around doing nothing. And I think it was first or second edition, you actually got XP for making magic items, and now this reverses it. So how does that benefit? I think it's a bad mechanic the way it's done. Is I don't mind it if they're using XP to invest into an item where they can make an item more powerful for themselves, but I do mind it when, like you're saying, is, well, now we have to go find the biggest and baddest monsters all the time with the challenge rating. And I'm not necessarily against the challenge rating, but I hate characters losing levels for something I view as silly in that aspect. There are different systems that I think are better for that, where it's just pure XP systems, very similar, which are skill-based systems, and go, okay, you can invest in skills or you can invest in magic items. Which one do you want? But for D&D, levels are so integral to it, and to make players lose levels, to me, it's just bad.
Some of the criticisms I saw, though, of 3rd and 3.5 was that clerics and wizards outstripped other classes in terms of power when they went up. So maybe that was a result.
Magic became like the thing to have. If you played a pure fighter, and let's just take 3.5. If you were a pure fighter all the way up to level 20, what the hell are you doing? That's the honest question, because you should be taking prestige classes. You should be having forms of magic, but the game and the system that was being courted, the players that were being courted with 3.5 and with Pathfinder were not the old school AD&D group, because they had their system. 3rd, 3.5 and Pathfinder specifically targets munchkins who liked to play those big number of games, who liked to have the whole meta knowledge of, like, here's how my character will be progressing. These are part of it. The story is a lovely thing for them, but at the end of the day, it is the numbers games that really gets there.
Yeah, that was the dawn of the character build.
Exactly. And it's
that was the big thing that put me off those editions.
It didn't help that Dragon Magazine actually had that was in the articles. It was something that was reinforced by the writers of the game. But
I didn't. I only played 3.5 a couple of times. It was okay, but I did like. I don't know, and I'm not necessarily against challenging, but like you're saying, is at a certain point, that's where I just say, okay, we're going to stop. We're going to start at low level again and work our way up. And I don't
going
know.
back to Saxius's talk about, like, why are you just a straight fighter? all the way up to level 20 or whatever. Clearly there was an expectation you weren't going to, because that period, the 3.5 period for Dragon magazine is like, I actually had a subscription at that point. I could manage to get a subscription for once in my life, and then promptly it ended. But so I killed Dragon. If you need anybody to blame, it was me. But I also killed the old Warlord comic. So if you liked that, you can blame me too. But,
no. Hey, that Warlord comic was awesome. You didn't kill it. It just died.
Well, 3 issues after I finally got my subscription to that as a kid, it ended. So, but anyways, every issue of Dragon, you'd have 3-4 different prestige classes.
Yeah,
it was ridiculous, and they were just garbage. I mean, sorry to anybody who likes 3.5, but as a DM, I also found 3.5 the worst one to run. It was mechanically so clunky. The only good thing out of 3.5 was templates. I really wish they would bring them back for 5th edition. Templates were so great. They're like, oh, I want to make an elemental goblin. Okay, here's the elemental template. I'll just slap it onto a goblin. But you needed that in 3.5 because it was so mechanically crunchy. But the expectation definitely was that you were going to be taking 1 or 2, maybe even 3 different prestige classes in the course, because some of the prestige classes were only 4 levels.
Yeah.
I'm going to dip a toe into, Slug Speaker and go on for.
Was all XP in 3 and 3.5 gained from monsters?
Pretty much.
Yeah,
because
there were no system or no support if you wanted to do role play or anything. It was monsters. You didn't have anything for spells. You didn't have anything for role playing. That was all down to the discretion of the DM. Mechanically, it was fully supported for you. Go away and you kill. It's not the loot is literally just a reward for you. That's
rules,
it.
Yeah, rules as written. There was nothing. Granted, there's always going to be Dragon articles that talk about things you can do, but I don't count those when we're talking about the actual system, because those have been there since the dawn of the game. But yeah, it was clear that it was a very it was a numbers game and a mechanical game, and it kind of had to be, because they've had that open-ended system where your dragon that you're fighting could have an armor class of 52 or whatever.
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to look up here. So
that's
I'm
why I
trying to
like
look at
at least
some
the
of one.
bounded accuracy in 5e is good again.
Yeah, I mean that's one thing they did. I did that video a while back on the good and bad points of 5th edition, and that was one of the things that I thought was a good point. The fact that it's made the numbers sensible, because my only pen and paper experience of 3 and 3.5 was a brief conversion of a previous Castle and Crusades campaign to 3rd edition, because Castle and Crusades, the mechanics weren't doing what the DM wanted. But the only problem is we all converted our characters according to how we'd been role playing them, with no thought as to making them work for 3rd edition. And yeah. I ended up with an almost unplayable cleric because he was so weak by 3rd edition standards.
Yeah, playing 3.5, I sucked, because I never make a character with like the build in mind. It's always the character, and then I make the stats fit my character. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Listen, when you kick your own DM out of his house because you don't want him to hear the plans that you have, because you and your group has optimized yourself like that's when I knew I had gone too far in 3.5.
You crossed the line. So you were looking something up there, Roman.
Well, I'm looking over at the CRs for non-combat encounters. There's some for mission goals, some for role-playing awards. But look at this. It's just large enough so the player knows them. 50 XP per character level per adventure. I'm like, that's nothing. That's 500 XP when you need how many thousands? And that's the problem that I have with some of these is, like everything else, is it kind of, XP determines what your players will do. And speaking of one, which I do like in one area, which was the and if anyone's familiar with the Cypher system, when you have what's called a GM intrusion, where the DM asks the players if it's okay if they do something, and they say yes or no, and they get XP for it, and then you do something that is completely ridiculous or something else, which every time I've played it, I've always said yes, because it usually makes the game more interesting. And I think that's one of those that I would probably, I'm trying to run a game that's starting up in July or so with my friend, but I would probably do that and say, okay, like you hit the monster and your sword sticks in it and it flies away. What are you going to do? You can do stuff like that from a mechanical standpoint. And I think that's good. I think that encourages the players to accept a negative consequence for extra XP. And it usually makes the game a lot more interesting by doing that. So that's where I fall into some of these of the non-traditional XP factors, and I wish there was more of it.
Yeah.
So let's ask the elephant in the room, because I've been waiting for us to arrive here.
What?
Fourth edition. Which
I've
one
played
of you?
one session of it.
Never
Oh
played
well,
it.
you don't count then.
Never played it.
There we
I
go.
have never
Go on.
played it. I'm not even familiar. I mean, I read the rules, and all I could think was, this isn't the D&D I want to play. And I'm not even saying it's a bad system. I noticed there were certain things like, well, you could get this one spell, and that's, well, part of the cool thing of being a magic user is you could get a bunch of different spells. Instead, it was kind of, well, you pick this ability versus this ability. And I went, and it didn't encourage role playing. It really felt like a miniature board. I know everyone talks about it felt like an MMO. To me,
I
it
don't
felt
think
like a
so.
board game.
It was more like a miniatures game.
Yeah, it was miniature game. Yeah, go ahead.
If it had been advertised as a miniatures, not a D&D game, but or a D&D strategy game, board game, it would have been fine as an iteration of D&D. I think
I've always said that it was not a bad game in and of itself. It just wasn't D&D, and the worst thing they ever did was just slap D&D on it.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. That's fourth edition.
If it had come out as something else and I had seen it on the shelf and I was looking over it, I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. And I probably would have picked it up and put it right next to the other 6, 7, 8, 9 fantasy RPGs I own.
No, I don't know enough about fourth edition XP to even comment on that, to be honest.
The gross thing that I don't like about it that really turned me off is reading about how magic items were. They're basically like, oh, just tell your DM and he'll just like give you a magic item. And if you don't like the magic items, you can like render them down into whatever material and like have it turned into a different magic item. I'm like, really?
So that's why it feels like an MMO, then, isn't it? Because yeah.
That is where I think some of those, and I think one of the reasons a lot of people thought it was courting the MMOs, which I still don't believe that it was, even though it felt like it was. It's just that control panel.
It was made to
character
compete.
sheet.
It was made to compete with MMOs because WotC and Hasbro needed to stay relevant, especially with the ongoings of World of Warcraft had been taking on. There was more and more video games that was coming out. They needed some way to sort of branch into it, to sort of appeal both to the video gamers, make it more easier for them to get into it by simplifying the rules. And actually in 4th edition, if you read it, it is basically just, it's a miniatures game. You count squares, you don't count feet.
It was even built from the ground up with the intention of a virtual tabletop.
Yeah, there was a massive. It was a huge part of the investment of 4th edition, and it didn't really flourish the way it wanted to. But anyway, we're getting way off the topic of XP.
I mean, speaking of 4th edition, is you can tell that it was probably competing with Warhammer to sell miniatures. I mean, that's what I was looking at. Everyone talks about MMO, but to me, it was more to sell miniatures with an MMO kind of thing, with where, oh, I can do this action or this action. But
that sort of thing, wasn't it? Yeah,
sure.
I will say the one merit for 4th edition, and this is probably the best thing that we got out of it, was a truly experimental version of D&D that looked at what you could do within the framework of D&D still, and bits of it trickled into 5th edition. Not some of the best bits, like why did they get rid of minions? That's a great rule. The minion rules.
In my opinion, the bits that trickled into 5th edition are the bits that bring 5th edition down, in my opinion.
Well,
In
there
my
are,
estimation.
but I think it is good to see that there. I mean, like I said, if there's any merit, it's the fact that there was a highly experimental version of D&D
Yeah.
to see what did and didn't work, what you could and couldn't do, because every version of D&D, even 3.5, for all intents and purposes, has been just a tweak of D&D. It hasn't really, nothing's been groundbreaking about it in 3 editions.
No, but it works. It's been working for so many editions. Yeah, they took an experimental phase to try it out with 4th edition. It has built its fan base, absolutely. But ultimately, as we see with 5th edition, they decided we're going to move back to the larger roots that actually feeds us.
Let's just call for you what it is. It's the new Coke of D&D.
Not wrong. You're absolutely. I mean, that's a great analogy.
Anyway,
Okay, so
we're on
we move on to back to XP and on to 5th edition. Now, I mentioned a little example. Just want to explain something here for Mark. I was playing this was quite a long running 5th edition campaign where I was a player, and there was one particular player who enjoyed playing very different characters, and he was playing the part of a very flamboyant fighter who refused to wear armor, and his highest stat was his charisma. And he got to about level 6 as a fighter, and he asked if he could take a level of bard, because in 5th edition, if you become a bard, you gain proficiency in a musical instrument, and he did it purely because he wanted to be able to play a musical instrument around the campfire. Nothing to do with power, nothing with anything else. The fact is, he was a flamboyant character with a high charisma, and he wanted to be able to say he was playing the lute around the campfire. And that was it. And I have no problem with that terminology, that dipping a level to do something flavorful like that.
Oh, yeah. I did that with my last character.
But okay, XP then in 5th edition. Now, we have touched on it in my first sort of 8 to 10 points of how people treat XP nowadays. I've got here that there's a lot of people who play 5th edition. They've got a strange assumption when it comes to XP, and there is still very much the you must kill things for XP mindset, and that is pushed. The manual, I think who was it? Saxius? I think it was you who mentioned that the manuals don't give enough explicit information in terms of giving out XP, for other activity.
Yeah,
and if you stick to the rules as written, XP for monsters in 5th edition, you advance through the levels at a stupid rate anyway, really quickly.
You also find that milestones, at least in 5th edition, has been pushed aggressively so.
Yeah,
it's been very aggressively pushed out, not just, in terms of what we see in the media of, here's how other people do it, here's how this is being done. Open up, again, I'm going to use Curse of Strahd, just open up any of the modules. They break it down by chapter, by level, and basically go like, here is where you're going to go. And if you follow the module, as most DMs are going to do, you're going to see, okay, so you go from level 1, you're going to go up to level 3, and you're going to go there. You could basically see like the alphabet being laid out for you. You're going to go from A to B to C and so on, which helps new DMs immensely. It also means that railroads are going to be attached, which it's not a problem if you turn the railroads into a roller coaster and allow the players to enjoy the what comes with a roller coaster. But you now have ingrained into the system and within the products this thing of, by the point you come to here, you should be this. And in the books, especially the DMG, it just sort of goes like, you can do all this math, or you can just go, you've achieved this many things and well done, slap on, here's a new level, move on. Because it's easier to say that and then just move on. because it supports the formula
Yeah,
for
well,
the
that goes with the like, what do you can call it, the Hickmaning or of games. How modules turn to story based. Milestone makes perfect sense for story driven gaming.
yes.
If I mean, you can do XP with story driven gaming, but it XP is highly variable, and therefore, going back to your Curse of Strahd reference, if you went strictly by XP, there's no guarantee that the party's going to be as tough as they need to be by that
It
point.
won't.
One of the problems there, I think, is with the newer campaign books, though, is they're also building the campaign as they foresee it. But I think there's an unwritten expectation, and maybe even written, because I don't play a lot of them, that the DM is going to, and actually I would say probably an expectation is in writing, because there's a lot of side stuff that's published, like on the DM's Guild and everything like that, that the DM should be inserting little side quests and more things to do to get those players to where they're supposed to be if they're not milestoning.
Yeah.
And I mean, Barovia, for example, has a lot. I mean, you could put so much stuff just with Barovia.
My
You know,
God,
little
the shit
side
I can
quests
do in
and stuff. I mean,
Barovia.
every village could have a quest in it. I mean, and really, all it takes is just one night of zombies to really make that gap.
Okay. So I'm going through it right now as Wolves is written right now, looking at this. And to be fair, milestones are supposed to be, major milestones are hard encounter. Minor milestone is an easy encounter. So there's XP based off of just that, which I think that you mentioned earlier, John, about awarding so many points of XP as you're adventuring. And it says, okay, you get goals, which is what I like. I don't have to set the goals for that. Just do something that actually moves the story along. Discovering a hidden location or reaching an important destination. I think those are all good from a milestone standpoint, but those are still XP based. I think the problem is that people are confusing milestone with story-based advancement, which is very similar. And I don't mind story-based, and I don't mind milestone. I don't like session-based advancement. That's the one that I don't like. And I think a lot of people are trying to mix, saying that they're sessions. Well, we're here for 3 sessions. We should get a level. No.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that one. This whole we've played for a session. Okay, you've gone to second level because you've survived your first session. No, you've got to achieve something, and I like XP as a way of saying your characters have achieved something to get that XP. And whether the DM is giving out a fixed 500 XP each for completing this particular task, it's still that tangible amount that the players feel like they're getting for success. I don't mind that at all.
And I like that. As while I say I like milestone, and I do, and I like story-based advancement, which I guess mine's a mixture of the two, is I still want to also give extra XP if you're role-playing, extra XP if you're doing something. And you can do that depending on, I just don't like the fact that they have 1,500 XP or whatever it is. It's been a while.
Yeah, you're right.
Why don't you just cut it by 100? And this is why I like DCC in that fact is it says, you get anywhere from 0 to 2 XP depending on how tough this threat is or something like that, which means you can still gain at least low levels within about a session or two. As you get up higher, then of course it gets harder and harder, which to me is great. But I think that's one of the things that comes down to it is they think that more equals better rather than trying to make it simpler. Do I need to, this one's worth 15 XP and this one's worth that much. I would much rather them say this encounter will be worth, a dragon will be worth 20 XP. Okay, that's easy enough. That's one level for at whatever it is. But that's what I'm looking at as far as D&D is concerned.
I mean, one of the arguments I see people use against XP amongst the 5th edition crowd is they believe that the using XP encourages the characters just to run around killing everything.
Yes.
My response to that is Well, it doesn't if the DM's doing their job.
Yeah, it's part of that weird prejudice against the old school, and I use the term prejudice freely because if you talk to groups, there is a weird. It goes both ways because there's also an undeserved nostalgia for old editions as well. Like oh, it was this magical time and it was great. Play the games you want to play, but fifth edition gamers, a lot of the new, especially the new crop that's come into it since that's their only edition. Yeah, there is that idea that back then we were all a bunch of grumpy old white guys sitting around the table killing things all night, kicking down doors and taking their stuff. And that is the short form that you hear repeated, like with earnest belief that is what it was. And I've never played that way.
Did when we were 12 or 13, maybe, but
even when I was 8, it was like, oh, you did something cool. Here, have some extra. I mean, anybody who says that, I'm not anybody. Most people who say that, I think, are lying because we have all been there and said, okay, you brought me a 6-pack of Coke, have an extra 100 XP. But
my players think I'm a joke about going farming XP, and my reply to them is, okay, if I feel you're farming XP, you'll get 0.
You want to hear farming XP? You want to hear how my players farm XP? They found out when I made them play Pendragon that there is a wonderful little sidebar that says that if you can make the DM have a good time and make him laugh, he should be rewarding you XP for that.
I support that.
And no, in an Arthurian game where I was expecting serious mythical events and playing through this, your serious nights, I don't want to be
you
sitting.
got Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Worse, it just goes downhill from there. I don't want to sit there and one of the players decides like, I've got to go and get married. Oh wait, no, I'm rejected, so I'm just gonna have a bastard child instead. Roll up a random event. Oh, your child was kidnapped by the elves. That's a real event that could happen in Pendragon. The player goes, oh no, I will have to action that once we start the next game. It's like, completely agree. Next game comes around, the player doesn't say anything. I just move the story along and 8 sessions down because each session is a full year in the game. And your character will age, they will die of age, and if you don't have an heir, you got to start that dynasty way over. My point is, that player realized on session 8, he still hadn't gone out to look for his child. I don't think I've laughed that hard at this realization that 8 years after his child disappeared, that he remembered he had a kid. I still mock him till this day, but I had the entire group sit there and go, we deserve XP because you laughed.
You know what? Speaking of XP, and I do like this, and like I said, I have several different books out here I'm all looking at. And one of them, for my Exalta, whether people like it or not, is the roll bonus. Is that the players intentionally cede the spotlight of the scene to focus on another player's character. And I like that a lot because it prevents the people who want to advance quickly will allow other people to shine. And that's I like having XP that incentivizes people from monopolizing the spotlight.
I like good sportsmanship awards. Yeah, those are.
Yeah.
I mean, 5th edition tries to do something like that with inspiration, but I always forget that exists. But
And inspiration, usually you're limited to how much, but XP will actually encourage it.
I know the XP is a better incentive is what I was trying to go for because at least I would remember that exists because I've been playing 5th edition how long and I still forget to issue out inspiration.
Yeah.
Right. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Go on.
No, I was just thinking. It's those little sidebars about stuff, and I under what Saxia said is, well, you have to make sure the GM has fun. Part of that is the GM to say, look, I want to have fun, but I want to keep this serious. And saying, if you don't keep it serious, now all I'm doing is laughing my head off. We're playing the wrong game, and you're not going to get extra XP for that. And that's some of what comes in there. not that I think that any of us have a problem telling characters no, uh, but we don't want to reward bad behavior.
No, no.
It did not stop my group. But that's my group. So then it was just the whole thing of like, it's in the book, Oscar. You have to do it, Oscar. It's fun for you, right, Oscar?
Yeah, again, that's what it comes down to. Like, just because something's in the book doesn't mean I'm not going to toss it.
Exactly. Quite right. We've been through all the versions of D&D, and I'm going to come to a few of the questions that we've had in chat over the last 15 minutes or so, because there's been some good ones.
Chat's been on fire.
Chat's been brilliant tonight. Chat's been great. Grumpy Old Slan talks about the age-old favourite of undead draining player levels. I like that in first and second edition. I haven't played enough third and fourth edition. In fifth edition, I don't drain levels, but I do say that the hit point drain that they cause is permanent while that undead that caused it is still roaming around.
In fifth edition, aren't there some that drain attribute? They drain attribute points too.
Yeah. Shadows up.
Yeah, I personally love XP level drain. I think it's one of the only ways to make truly terrifying monsters, not just undead, terrifying to players.
Of course. And undead have got two reasons to be to be frightening. Low level undead are fearless and don't have much treasure. They will keep coming at you. There's no morale checks for them. And high level undead are intelligent and will take your levels, your life.
And there's the third thing that a lot of them create more of their own.
Oh, they do.
Or lessers too. But I used to use life level drain on things like demons and devils in the form of corruption. Like, okay, it's got a corrupting touch. Part of yourself is gone because the evil of the demon has taken it.
I hate level drains. I do. It just goes against my very nature. How do you become dumber? Which is basically what happens. How do you forget how to cast a spell? I mean, those are the things that just it goes against my very nature. That said, I do like permanent hit point drain while the monster's still alive. I do like the fact that it can do other aspects. I like stat drains a lot. The problem that I have with some of it is that things like whites and stuff, I don't. But again, looking through one of the old OSCs when they have where the what is it called, the Blood King? I'll have to go look at what it's exactly called, where they give options for different things that you can use for it, and I prefer that. Is that after reading Bram Stoker's Dracula, I really do prefer that, where it's not like, oh, you're 0 level, a vampire bites you, okay, you immediately become one. No, I'd rather stats slowly go down over time and farm them out.
For us, we just kind of always just read it as something very metaphysical. Your soul was drained away, whatever. Not just your life. And so, yes, with that went some of your experience.
The explanation. Sorry, go on.
I think 5th edition, again, bringing up 5th edition, misses a huge opportunity. They've got those wonderful exhaustion rules, and they never use them anywhere. Having undead life level drain inflict levels of exhaustion, I think would be a really scary way to do it for players, because at first you're like, okay, well, I've got some disadvantage. And then you're like, well, now I'm half movement. And you're like, well, now I've got disadvantage on attacks as well. And then eventually you're like, and I can't move anymore.
I like
it
that
really
better.
Does simulate the life drain,
I like that better myself, is it doesn't impact your ability to actually think and things like that. But to me, that makes sense. It is draining your life. You are becoming physically exhausted, and
it's a perfect fit, but they don't use it.
Yeah, but you're dealing with magic here. Like, you're dealing with creatures who are connected directly to the negative plane. The negative plane is going to be draining you, not just in terms of a physical level of your HP, your con, your strength. It's going to be draining you mentally. It's going to be draining you emotionally. It's going to be leaving you as a hollowed out husk by the time it's really done with you. And that's why I I like when it comes to level drain that it touches you. You lose this. Yeah, you lose some spells when it comes along with that because they don't just take your physical thing. They don't just take the life. They take you, the being, the thing that makes you the person up until this point. Just like there are spells like Brain Kill, which is a necromantic spell that you just go into someone's head and just bam, you have got either a full year that you have just wiped out anything that they've learned in that year. That can be XP, that can be abilities, just utter amnesia where the player has to relearn these things to bring themselves back up, or you can just turn it and say, like, you don't know about John, the blacksmith, anymore. Any interactions with him is now gone. These are just magical things and otherworldly creatures and abilities that are out there that can do it. So I like using level drain because I like it when players turn around and say, I want to wrestle with the vampire. Yes. Go on. 2 levels per touch. I will give you snoo for that.
Yeah, I obviously, with newer editions, it's about keeping the game going, and that's what they're looking for. That's why 5th edition has kind of neutered it. But I also think that the writers were coming from a very different frame of mind. First of all, they're being informed by the fiction of the time, probably their religious makeup to a certain degree, because
That is true.
So to them, I mean, the touch of the dead. I mean, if you read things like Bram Stoker's Dracula, because it was referenced. I mean, I think the most vivid, depiction of the effects is when we're looking at Lucy in there. What happens to her in the story, or Harker when he's over there. But those are clearly exhaustion if you wanted to give them rules for for 5th edition, but that's the effect, not necessarily origin. And I think back then the level drain is an easy mechanic to keep track of too. It's like you lost a level. The only problem is that it was horrible to use on the fly. That's the only reason I didn't really like it. Suddenly you have to calculate what your character is 2 levels down.
There was that aspect. The problem is that you lost more hit points than you would have if you'd been if you're 5th level. Let's say you had 40 hit points. Well, I only rolled 5 hit points between 3 and 4, but I lost 10. I hated that aspect because it's not like it reset you, so you could actually be a lot. That was one. The other one I hated was the fact they had the restoration spell. I'll
They
be
still
honest.
have it.
I used to put a bit on the character sheet at the bottom for my group where they recorded how many hit points they rolled for each level.
Yeah,
and they'd move 1 down on that.
Yeah, I make my players do the exact same, specifically because of level drain. I mean, later editions that went on and said, here's you, like Pathfinder says, you just lose 5 hit points, and then you just move down from there as you progress on. But they've changed it so that you don't have a 1d4 hit dice wizard anymore. It's a d6 now.
Mm-hmm.
And they sort of just moved on from there. But I make my players do the bookkeeping. If it's not 5th edition, then yeah, you're going to be doing some bookkeeping. I've told them, here you are. This is what I expect as a player. And if you turn around and I hit you with level drain and you haven't done it, you're going to be pulled aside into another chat, and you will be getting a piece of my mind because I made it very clear from the beginning. And I get angry at players. I really do, because I laid down a very strong foundation from the very beginning. If they can't be bothered to do that work, I need them to get out of the room, or they're going to get hurt. Because I don't have time for this. I don't have time to invest into these things.
As a mechanic, I just hate it. I didn't mind attribute drains. I don't mind a lot of the other stuff. To be fair, though, if you read the old Dungeon Master's Guide, exhaustion was the equivalent of level drain. I'm sorry, level drain was the equivalent of exhaustion in 5e. If you start reading it, if you do this and you haven't rested a certain amount, you lose a level. And that's why I said I didn't like it for a lot of reasons, as I felt characters, this is what you've gone through for experience, and then you just negated it. I'm like, that I'm never just fighting undead. And it's not because I fear undead, it's just a pain in the butt for me. And and I said, well, I kind of like having undead in certain aspects, but if the player's just like, no, we're passing, they're like, all right, we're going to do something else. I don't like that aspect from it, but I do agree with whether it's a banshee, a land, or one of the Dragon Maidens had a Lianchi, which was basically like a muse that slowly drained you of your energy. And then the other one was the succubus as well. That would drain you by kissing you. I much prefer saying you're going to lose these stats. No, stats stay away until you kill off the monster. It's not quite as dangerous, but man, I hate saying it, if you lose a couple of points from your 18,000 fighter, boy, he just lost what? +4 damage right there. So that's what whether it's strength or con or dexterity, those can have really big impacts on those high stat characters. And then of course as they get lower and lower, and then once you hit 0, if it hasn't done enough damage, you're dead. So that's kind of where I come from that, and I understand. But as a player, I was just like, wait a minute, I spent all this time earning it, now you just suck this away. I felt cheated. And you can get mad, especially if you're in the front line. Like, nope. You know what, Magic, you're on your own. I'm leaving. Bye. Good luck.
Yeah, I mean, it did its job and made undead terrifying.
That was its point, wasn't it?
Yeah.
All right, Mage's Musings asked, how do you feel about awarding unequal amounts of XP to your players? No problem.
No problem with it.
No problem at all.
Absolutely. I want to encourage certain behaviors, and in doing so is if everyone gets the same amount of XP, then it doesn't matter what they do. But if you are awarding more XP for certain actions, you're encouraging all other players to do those same actions. And then I want to encourage players to do certain things. So that's why I want to give different awards. If you're a better role player, you get more XP. Now, it doesn't mean you have to be at the same level. Those are two different things. Just because you have one thespian actor, if you have Johnny Depp in your group and you have, Joe the Potato, if Joe the Potato tries, he's still getting XP.
Yeah, you don't have to have the big R all the time. You can have the little R. But I also feel like there are times where, using it punitively is deserved. Not like with a heavy hand. But if you have a thief, for example, in the party who is constantly disappearing somewhere so the rest of the party can go fight the monsters and he comes out afterwards, then okay, well, he's going to miss the combat XP, but if he's going to start role playing and being cowardly, and I mean, first thing I would do is let the players in the party deal with it.
Yes.
But, yeah. But there are times where you could on the other hand, now that I'm saying it out loud, it could just be a case of that's role playing, and okay, have a role playing. If you came up and said your character concept is the cowardly thief who never wants to actually get into a fight, well, okay, you're playing him right. But
well, also when we're looking at it is, do I have any problems with giving less XP to players who don't show up? Well, I want you to stay somewhat close, but if you get half XP, they're like, well, that's punishment. No, it's not. You weren't there. If we hadn't played at all, you would get 0 XP.
Yeah, you're really lucky that I'm giving you any, and you didn't actually participate. You didn't make any of the decisions. You didn't really take any of the risk, especially in situations where their character isn't actually even being active in the game and not being ghost played by somebody else.
So yeah, I mean that's why I don't have any problems with it. Now your bigger issue is when you get something very outclassed. But if you notice the XP system, and again, I haven't really looked at 5th edition in a while, it starts doubling. So the difference in XP is not as big. You're still within a couple levels of each other normally. It's only whenever you start getting your 3rd level wizard, 9th level fighter, you really having issues.
Yeah, 5th edition has a weird XP anyways, because the early levels go by in, like nothing, and then you slow down about the mid-range. They really milk that prime adventuring time frame,
and then you speed up around level 10, don't you?
I think it is because they want to make sure that if you're going to last that long, then fine, you can get to epic level play, which is ridiculous, which is kind of funny because WotC doesn't make anything to support epic level play. There's plenty of 5th edition or third party stuff, but WotC does not do anything for that.
But does it make the game better? I guess this is the other part is, well, as you get those higher XP, is the game actually that much more fun? Now, for some people, that high level is, but I've talked to my friend, which he got up to 20th level very quickly, and he just didn't find as much fun as he did in the earlier levels.
Given what often happens at lower levels, I fail to actually see a lot of times what the benefit of getting up to high levels. And when I say lower levels, I mean that mid-range, the high level of that mid-range. I mean, is there really much of a difference between, what we're doing at level 14 and level 20? When at level 14, you've got me going into hell and dealing with Orcus directly.
So,
yeah.
when it comes to handing out the XP, in my second edition one, I do it because I established that that's what I wanted to do and it's what I prefer to do. But on your typical group, when I'm not dealing with people who are mature, that's the wrong word. When I'm dealing with people who are not willing to engage in the vision that I have for the game, for example, where getting on equal XP is a bit alien to them, then yeah, it's actually easier to have a group XP to be given out because, well, if you're going to be having some players who are naturally shy, they don't want to do the whole role playing out. They rather just want to say, well, my character wants to say this, and go and do this, and that's it. That's their engagement. That's not because that they are bad at role playing or acting. It's just this is how they are as people. They don't like the spotlights. They prefer to be staying back. Now, that would then mean that they would technically be punished because they didn't engage in the group. They basically they like being in the background. I think it was Matt Colville who called them. They're just the audience members of the group. They like to sit there, observe. They enjoy watching it. Oh, they absolutely love it. And when it comes to their turn, they'll quickly sort of roll, get over with, and then move on because they want to see things unfold in front of them and they want to feel a part of it, although they don't want to directly intervene into it. This is what that person wants. It's what he enjoys. And if I start going like, well, Dave, you're now going to get, I don't know, 200 XP for this because you didn't really roleplay. It's like, that's okay. That's punishing him at that point for being himself.
Is that punishment, though? I mean, to me, the punishment would be if they're no longer able to play with the group, would be is a bigger punishment. Being within a level or two, if one guy's one level higher because they did a better job, I don't really think that's punishment.
You're not giving him any incentive to basically do more. But it's because at the end of the day, when you're looking at it, he doesn't want to do it because he's going to be either pushed outside of his comfort zone or he's so happy in what he's doing that it's probably going to be easier to have everyone across the board are going to be given the same amount. The moment you start going, okay, Ben, you get 100. You get 150. Charles, you get 350 for this. And you just go down the line and then you turn over towards the one guy who didn't do much, give him 50 because he was there in physical body, but he didn't really do much to participate in it. Well, at that point, it's going to be quite blatant at that point that you're not going to be rewarding him for anything.
Right. So I'm going to call you. Hold up, real quick. I'm going to call you on that. Has that actually happened, or is that a theoretical problem?
No, I have
had that happen in any game.
No, I have had players sit and they have just been quiet throughout the majority of the time.
Oh no, I mean them getting upset. I'm obviously players are quiet and don't do anything. But have you ever actually had anybody actually for real get upset about not getting bonuses?
In that game, I kept everything across the level, but I would at points sort of go, you've done this, you've done that, and I have had that player turn around and say, so is this how it works? Like you only get bonuses for this? Like they were more confused by all of this since there was always that level, and then there was the whole thing of like other people would be getting into it. Now that person was new to it, but they were also the quiet one who wanted to also sit in the back. So yeah, it's in my experience, I've seen it.
Okay.
But that's maybe because I'm sitting and I've just got
With
niche people.
my experience in that situation has been, generally speaking, most players that I've run into will make a case for themselves. Also, hey, what about that thing that I did? And that's because as a DM, I've got a lot going on, so maybe I missed it. But also at that point, I think the other thing to look at is, if you're looking to use XP as an incentive, you can find other incentives for that player that I think would equate to what the other players are getting. Maybe his thing isn't XP. Maybe his thing is throw him an extra potion of healing now and again, or story elements that do appeal. Like, okay, cool, you didn't get XP, but because you didn't role play on the stage like the rest of the guys, but maybe that lord decided that he was gonna recognize what you did do mechanically speaking in game or whatever. So I mean, I think that's it's one of those problems I hear come up a lot that to me always sounds a little bit more
Oh,
theoretical.
I'll add another thing though that I always do in all of my games is I always try to have an after action report.
Yeah.
So not only do we sit down and discuss it, and usually players know who's doing a better job and okay, that's fine. But I agree with you is I want to sit down with the players and kind of individualize the game towards each person. Now, I know you can't do it perfectly, but if the like you're saying is okay, what do you want to do? Are you moving the story forward? And some players that just want to be spectators, I don't think that they really cared as much about getting the levels. They just want to see everyone else do everything. And if you have some people that really do a great job at role playing, and I want to give them XP, they're just fun to watch. I mean, it's just like watching a movie or something like that. So let me sit back. I enjoy this. The other part is, and I don't know how you guys do it, this is what, if we can get our games back together locally, we used to play for a couple hours, then we would have a big meal, and then we would play for another couple hours afterwards. So it was as much like a barbecue, except we did role playing than going outside. And
we always did potluck.
Yeah.
And my wife and I would, because we were the hosting house, we would do the main course, and everybody would bring sides and beverages, and that was always fun. But yeah, I agree with you there. It's about you kind of have to know your group. I had one player who probably could care less about role playing bonuses, and I have to assume so because he never complained when he didn't get them. But as long as his character, who had this backstory of being like a big, he had a real interest in teas and stuff like that, right? As long as I would occasionally throw out some rare herb that he found as they were traveling, or a recipe that the old elven matron in the local inn gave him, he was happy.
It's a case of know your players, isn't it? On that sense,
Yeah, and that's the thing. And so I think that I'm playing a while, and I've never is a strong word. Rarely have I ever had anybody take exception to not getting role-playing bonuses. And if they did, it was a bit of a grumble, and we could usually work around it. I also don't just give role-playing bonuses. There are other bonuses for problem solving, things like that. So I think that's a place where the non-actors at the table can still shine. So.
The other thing that I have done, and again, it depends on how you want to do this, and things that when we talk about, one thing we were talking about is giving XP, but we also talk about spending XP, of course, in different systems. Is sometimes in different systems, they're allowed to spend an XP to change part of the world. And I know some DMs
step away
hate that.
Real quick.
Some DMs hate that, but for me, I'm like, okay, you know what? I haven't fleshed out this. Go write up something, and you can go do that. And also, the other aspect as a DM is I think buy-in matters more than XP in certain cases, as long as players are staying relatively close in level. Usually a lot of these awards are not where players are going to be 4 or 5 levels ahead. They're going to be at most probably a third, maybe a little quarter. There may be 1 or 2 game sessions ahead of the other players at best. And that's, in a long game sessions, that's not a huge deal. If you're going to be playing for 20 or 30 game sessions, someone gets a level a little bit before, no one really cares that much. It's like, oh, okay, you got at session 5, you went up 1 level, and at session 6, I went up a level. It's not as big of a deal for that. But I think the biggest thing is always catering towards the players, what they want, and then of course giving them options to get XP in other ways rather than just.
What would be perceived as being a large gap at low levels, of course, closes up relatively as you go through the levels, because as you become more powerful, thus rewards get bigger, and if you're 250 XP behind at 3rd level or whatever, it might feel a big jump then, but by the time you get to 7th or 8th level, 250 XP is nothing.
Well, I mean, even at 2,000 or 3,000 XP isn't very much at 7th level. I mean,
no.
So, I think that's one of those that the RP should be a bonus, but it should not be one of these things that where, well, because you role played, you're at level 6 and everyone else is at level 3. That's a disparity and a problem with the DM.
Yeah.
Unless players just aren't showing up and you have the one guy who's there all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, if that discrepancy exists because of non-standard awards, then that's a problem. But if that's just the player's actions causing that, first of all, what's that player doing? Like, you guys go to the dungeon. I'll stay here in the inn. This is cool.
Something chat have been going on about is about characters knowing comparative strengths of other characters and training levels and that sort of thing. And this is something I do miss from earlier editions, where you had those lovely titles. The gaming level was almost like a formalized process, and you gained a new title, and you were meant to introduce yourself as Geek the Veteran or whatever.
That was cool before I worked in corporate America. And then I realized that titles were worthless. No, I do miss it. I mean, I was being facetious, but it was fun. I like that. I am Lord such and such, or I am a tracker or whatever. I can't even remember most of them.
But it sort of formalized the level process along with the training, and I like that. I liked it.
I do remember that it made making custom classes kind of a pain in the butt. I now have to come up with 20 different ways to say this.
Yes.
Well, don't they do that? I've been looking. I thought DCC had something like that, but obviously I'm wrong. Oh, no, it does. It says level and it gives a title. I like titles, and whatever you're spending money for your XP, that makes a lot of sense. It's not just training. It's also showing off your wealth and moving up in a higher social class.
Yeah.
And titles for us, when they did factor into role playing. I mean, if you were Lord such and such, or if you're just making stuff off the cuff, if I am a tracker of the 5th degree or whatever, like, oh, and you go to the local Rangers hut or whatever, and they're like, oh, cool. It could factor into role playing when you're looking for information or trying to flex on people.
Yeah. And that's exactly what they're for. I mean, you hear this a warrior at the bar talking, and if his title is Lord or whatever, you think, oh my God, he's gonna be hard, and it gives them clout, it gives them gravitas, and I like it. Anyway, Enio. Where were we? So okay, thanks. Saxius is going to have to head off. So thank you, Saxius, for contributing as always. Great to have you on.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's been a lot of fun.
Right, you have a good night.
Right, bye.
Later.
All right, where were we on the comments? You've all dived into bows. Where did that all start? Where did that all start?
I'm not sure. But
I'm looking at that, and then all I can think is, hey, let's go look up Todd's workshop and how he's going to be doing this armor against bows.
Yes, I've seen it. Right, yeah.
Well, no, he's doing another one, which I'm really looking forward to, where they're going to try like a full set of armor at different distances and things. I said, well, that will be pretty awesome.
Yeah,
So-
they had a question about, they were talking about draw strength and stuff, and it brought up for me the article in 127 of Dragon for bows built for strength that allowed you to add your strength bonus to your damage on your bow.
Yeah. I mean, that became almost expected when the gold box games came out and featured it. But it's not in any of the. It just in the old rules, it just says the DM might introduce it.
Yeah, it's one of those examples of going back to an earlier topic from an earlier stream about what is the right way to play. I mean, none of it is. It's all right right way to play. And Dragon just evolved the game forever beyond what is raw. I mean, bows built for strength made perfect sense when it came out, because it was the 80s. Every one of us had a bow. And lawn darts and ninja throwing stars and blowguns.
Well, they make sense in reality as well. I mean, they've examined the skeletons of the archers at Agincourt, and those guys were seriously well built. They were strong. Those bows were incredible.
I mean, I've pulled back. I have a 50-pound bow, and I kept injuring my shoulder when I tried doing it as quickly as I could. And people forget about just repetitive injuries and things like that.
Repetitive motion.
Well. The problem was that I would, if I went alone, I would overuse it, and it would hurt my shoulder for a week. Where if I went with a friend, we would alternate. We'd be fine with it. But to be fair, it said the 50-pound bow. The reality is, I was probably pulling an extra inch or two, so I have no clue on what the actual pull was. But as I'm starting to, I watched the Alexandrian when he was doing some stuff on Twitch, going over the old white box. And I'm beginning to understand hit points are different than how we think of it. We think of it as one hit. And what they were looking at is that's probably the number of times that you were beating your opponent up to the point that he left himself vulnerable, and you're slowly knocking him down. And
you can also look at it like resolve and stuff too. It's not necessarily physical damage.
General Nut makes a good point here. I'm guessing I get a big XP bonus for having my ugly mug on the stream the entire time. Elfbait, you get a small bonus for having an image that is actually you that isn't moving. But Omen Owl, I'm afraid, you're getting a penalty.
You know what though? That's my choice. That's my fault. But see, I don't mind that. As a player, if someone's doing a much better job, I'm actually cheering them on. I don't care what it is. My whole thing really comes down to, which goes a little bit, which is different from XP, is I just want to keep up enough with the level where I can be useful to the group. I have played a Dark Sun where I had lower stats compared to everyone else that had we know that they all cheated. They were all like 18s and 19s, and my highest stat was a 15. I basically sat around doing nothing, and that's not fun for anyone. And then that's where you get a problem with it, is with certain players. Now, World of Darkness or what I want to call more role-playing oriented games can deal with different power levels better, but AD&D, you need the characters relatively close, and they need to be useful. And if they aren't, and I've done this to players as well, is I'll take them aside and say, hey, your character's not working. I need you to roll another character, and we'll go from there. Even if I give them exactly the same XP, that's not usually. What's that?
My focus, though, in terms of sort of balancing that out, is I prefer to balance the spotlight. There's a 5th edition game that I'm running, and we're running 2 different groups in various sections. And what I try and do, the characters are all different levels, but what I try and do is I try and throw in specific things for specific characters fairly evenly. And that's how I try and balance it, rather than getting them to be mechanically similar.
Oh, no, I agree. Well, I had one not a D&D, this was a MAID game. And the guy played an autistic character, had too many flaws. And at the end, I said, stop. He's not working for the group. I need you to create something different. And I've done that to other players as well. I like, this is why I think session zeros are important, to make sure everyone has the same long-term, has the same focus on going forward and making sure that their characters integrate well. Unfortunately, if you have one thief and he's the only one that can pick locks and do all this other stuff, and everyone else is going to be a fighter, it's harder to get spotlight on the fighters in that aspect.
I have had very little success with session zeros. We never used to run them back in the day, but usually that's because every time we ran a campaign, we'd already been talking about it for weeks or whatever anyways. Because I was like, dude, I want to run a game. And you're like, oh, cool. What do we need? And you're chatting about it at school and stuff through the day. But yeah, since I started doing session zeros, they either like completely fall flat to where everybody's like, okay, couldn't we have just spent the last hour playing? Or stuff doesn't come out. Stuff, like I'll have players... horrible example, an actual gamer horror story. I have lost a friendship over one of my 5th edition campaigns. I had a coworker who got into one of my games, and we played several campaigns and lots of characters and I let him be very creative with his characters. The same guy was talking about with the tea and all of that, right? And it got to a point where he's like, "You're a shit DM. You've never given me anything." He just went off on me, and I'm like, "Dude, I'm like pulling apart his argument. I'm like, how can you say I never gave you anything? I'm coming up with custom tea recipes for your character, and for that character, and this other character you wanted to make this character that was kind of way out of the original concept of the campaign, and we made it work, and it was all neat, and I even came up with some cool stuff, custom like warlock pass because of 5th edition, right, for you and all that, but there was evidently just something bubbling up underneath. I mean, that's an extreme case, but yeah. I've always had just really no point to my session zeros. Everyone's like, all right, cool, that sounds like a fun campaign, or despite what everybody agrees to play, there's that one guy who shows up, I want to do this. I'm like, well,
as far as I'm concerned, I mean, a lot of people use session zero to try and lay out what table rules were. I'm not into that at all, but I like the idea of a session zero for everyone to get around a table and talk about their characters and create characters together. And as far as I'm concerned, that's where they begin. That's where the team begins. The moment the players sit around the table with their dice in their hands, ready to roll their stats, make a team that works.
That was my most successful session zero, was the one for my current campaign where we were going to start at 0 level, and I wanted everybody, I'm like, you are all from the same town. You are residents of the town. And I want you to figure out like how you know each other. And so we got my wife's character, who is the daughter of the innkeeper, who's always dreamed of being an adventurer because she keeps hearing all these cool stories from all the people come in, and so that's, and her mom and her dad were adventurers and all this stuff, right? And before they opened the inn, and then, we got another guy who's the son of the local clockmaker, but oddly enough, he looks human, but the gnome is a gnome. So, and then, we had one guy who played a not quite a townie, but he was the apprentice of the druid who lived in the adjacent wood. So he would come to town because he was the one who always got sent to Tashi Station to pick up power converters. And and then there was the guy with the tea who was like, and I want to make a dragonborn who has a tea shop in town. I'm like, I can make this work. We can make this work. But
well, and when I say session zero, I guess the way I'm looking at it is it's not as necessary if all the players are collaborating with each other before they actually get to the group. And we'll see about when I'm going to do looking at the 5th edition. And I'm waiting for my friend to see if he wants to play Conan, basically BX, or if he wants to do a 5e. It really depends on what his wife says, because she plays too, and she's actually a really good player. But I want to make sure that everyone is into the game. And
Yeah.
and really is the whole thing would be okay. How fast can you create characters? Which I know some people hate character generators. I kind of like them. Here, let's do this real fast. I don't have to guess in your stats. I don't have to correct anything. Let's do it. And if it takes, 5 or 10 minutes, everyone says, yeah, this is what I'll do. What's your role going to be in the group? Just set kind of expectations of what's going on. I've done that. The other thing I've done, or I've been trying to do, was in other systems where they don't have, where it's a skill-based system, I will literally tell players, don't put any skills down. And as you're playing, determine what skills you want to be using until you run out of points, whatever your base points are, and you go from there. And that way, depending on what type of game that we're playing, they don't feel like, well, I put all these points into this skill and we aren't using it. Okay. And go from there.
Yeah, that's the one I've had problems with in the past, is where everybody comes up with a cool concept and then they don't play that character. Like we went through all that discussion and all that, it's especially bad when it's like a custom fit character. It's like, okay, we did all of that work to make this character fit.
And the players then not playing ball.
The problem that I had with one was we were supposed to have a session 0, so we're all trying to meet each other, and the player just didn't want to play ball as far as getting back together, and it felt like we're pulling teeth. I said, no. From now on, everyone's going to be together. You're going to decide why you're together. I don't care. You guys make up the story on the fly. How do you know each other, and why are you adventuring together? And then we'll move forward from there. And that way, that's what I refer to it as. I want them to feel like they're part of a team before we actually go out.
I have one regular player who he's not able to play with us anymore now because he has a kid and that changed things. But almost every campaign I ran with him, he always played a character who was from outside whatever we were doing. And his logic for it was, I haven't been because he would often join late, in the campaigns for schedules. His explanation was always like, I haven't been here for the campaign, so I want to make a character who doesn't know anything, because, I don't know all of the stuff that's been going on. I'm like, that's great. But like in one game, he made a character who was from a far off desert kingdom that was nowhere near where everybody was from. And his character didn't speak any of the other languages, but he did speak Common. I'm like, okay, you speak Common, but you realize that Common doesn't communicate complex ideas. It's a basic trade tongue, right? And another one, he's like, and I'm this guy who washed up on the beach and doesn't have any memory. I'm like, dude, they're all the same character.
No. The worst one is, I'm a brooding loner.
Oh God,
yeah. You have to go. That's great. Then why are you with the group? Because if you can't tell me why you're with the group, you're gonna have to create a different character.
I lucked out on that one. I had one player, the T guy again. But in the first campaign I ran for 5th edition, he's like, all right, where can the elves come from? I'm like, well, there's this big forest kingdom. That's where the high elves are. And he's like, okay, cool. He's like, I want to be a spy. I want to masquerade it as a ranger, but I want to play a rogue character type. And I want to be a spy for the Elven Kingdom, coming out into the world to see what's going on, right? Like, hey, what's up with the people outside the forest, right? I'm like, that's cool, that's great. And so he wanted to, and he's like, I'm going to be kind of a loner character, but he was a good enough player, and this is one of those reasons why his ultimate explosion on me made no sense. So he played this really cool character where he's like, he would like write letters back to his sister back in the kingdom, and we'd actually have this NPC PC correspondence between them. So when he said, like, you've given me nothing, I'm like, are you serious? I wrote whole letters for your character.
More than anybody else, by the sound of it.
Yeah, but then he was like, the only problem is that he kept secret squirreling stuff at the table. He was very much like, my character secrets are my character secrets, and I'm not going to share them with the rest of the party. I'm like, that never goes well, man. Can you just say, you guys don't know this, but my character is doing this, And eventually that caused an issue at the table. But
my last session 0 when I did a session 0 was pretty much what Dave says in this comment here. We spent about an hour making characters. We spent about an hour role playing, so I could get the ideas. I basically said to them, don't make any backgrounds, nothing at all, but just let's have a bit of role playing, and I'll make things up around town to fit in what you role play and whatever. And then at the end of the session, something kicks off, something happens, something big happens, which leaves it on a bit of a cliffhanger for next time. And it's usually some combat which drags them all together.
Yeah, it's that old orcs attack thing. Yeah.
Yes, and yeah, when Mage's musings here, when players get too invested in a specific character idea that they shoehorn into the whatever game it is you're playing, if it doesn't work, they do take it too seriously.
Yeah. The only thing, anytime I have a player who does that, who wants to be like, well, why would my character do that? I'm like, look, Bilbo Baggins had no reason to leave the Shire, but he did. Bilbo has to leave the Shire for us to have a story.
Yeah.
You know, Frodo at least had the tales of his uncle. You know, if you can make the brooding guy, you can make the heartbroken person, you can make the honor hound, whatever you want to make. You know, the valiant paladin, you know, who's all heroic, you can make those all, but ultimately you have to come up with the dramatic reason for your character to play.
Yeah,
and,
cool. Yeah.
And that's what it comes down to. Don't make a character who's not an adventurer. Even if he's not an adventurer, find a reason for him to be an adventurer. You know?
And it's not all on the DM to make sure that player's invested.
Yeah, I'm not always going to be able to burn down your home village to motivate you.
Well, and then that comes.
I'm tired of murdering characters' parents.
Well, and then I think that gets too far in the background of when we talk about backstory. I like some backstory. I don't want this whole thing where, why aren't you 10th level already? You know, that's, you know, I don't mind you saying, you know, I have like 6 brothers and my parents are over here and we all loving and this is where we're from. That's kind of backstory I want. I'm getting tired of all the family is dead. I have no one else. I have no friends.
And that brings me to my crusade to never write a tragic backstory for a character ever again. The last 3 I have written have had motivations for adventuring built in, and they've had happy homes, or at least not tragic. You know, the last one I played was like the 5th son of a noble family, so he stood to inherit nothing, but he had brothers and a sister and parents and a grandfather who all had this happy, comfortable, noble life. He was sent to good sword schools. So that's why he was a battle master character in 5th edition, because he had all the cool combat stuff. And his whole thing was he had to adventure to make fortune and fame for himself. Because while he would probably get a nice stipend because his family was cool and wasn't going to leave him penniless, he wanted to be his own man. You know, so, you know, his grandfather, you know, bought him a nice set of half plate and a sword and sent him on his way.
And that's all I really need. I don't need this. Yeah, that was upon my head one time. They're saying, well, I guess it's in one of them for 5e. You did something you know, you were a hero. Like, I'm 1st level. What the hell would I fight? I was like, I'll just say I fought an owlbear and I was the only survivor of the group that hunted the owlbear. Owlbears are pretty weak, you know, as far as monsters go, but it had to be something equivalent to what a 1st level character could fight.
And if you imagine, 6 first level characters going against an owlbear, the odds are that the majority of them are going to suffer.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to write that backstory and then, like, you know, I always take like editorial privilege when it comes to backstories as a DM too. I'm like, okay, cool. So your character encountered an owlbear. You didn't kill it. Let's just you didn't kill it.
Away.
How did it die? Now, how did it die? And then we can get into, like, you know, we were teetering on a log over a chasm, and the owlbear, you know, lunged at me and fell over. And ever since that day, I had a desire to see more monsters in there. Or he was down upon me, he was about to kill me, and an arrow went through his eye socket. Okay, now who was the mysterious stranger who killed him? I don't even know right now, but that can come back in the campaign.
Yeah.
You know, it's dramatic still. It's the drama you were looking for as a player, but it doesn't make you somebody you can't be.
Yeah,
You know,
that's my whole thing. Is I like having, and I think that's one of the failings for 5e is that they put something in there, but and players have an unrealistic expectation. I killed a dragon. No, you have to go look at your small town farmer. What would you fight?
well, like, yeah, I took the folk hero background. Okay, well, what are you a folk hero for? Like staving off the rat plague of 1265? You know?
The thing is, 5e doesn't even need anyone to. It doesn't need the players to write a backstory. It's got the flaws, ideals, and motivations sort of system. That's enough.
Yeah, and that's there for people who don't want to or can't. But even your background plus that should give you everything you need. But the background often sets unusual expectations. Like, I am a veteran. Maybe my background is soldier, and I'm first level. What did I like? Fight for one fight season? You know, I saw marched to when the horns blew and the feared was called up, and that was it. And I basically marched around with a spear, but never really saw any combat.
Well, there you go. Yeah, and it bored you. So now you're an adventurer.
Yeah, I took an arrow to the knee, and now that's why I have a dexterity of 10. I've loved playing old characters who are like first level. Like, why is your character 50 in first level? Well, he was a farmer until bandits killed his family back before I had my crusade. But you know, he started adventuring when he was 50.
Yeah. Well, give some reason they left home. Maybe there was a drought and you lost everything, and you said, "I have to go do something." But yeah,
simple basic economics. I am a farmer. I am seeking a better life for my family. I have ventured forth. You know, I'm a fair to middling fighter. I've got an old battle axe and a shield and a helmet, and I know I can earn more money as a mercenary or an adventurer or a fighter than I can tilling turnips.
So yeah, there's that. But yeah, players need to invest themselves into the game somehow, because if they don't, this is the problem that I've had all too often, is they make a character and then they kind of treat it as disposable, and you're like, well, as a GM, I'm not going to do anything with your character because you keep killing them off, which is fine. I'd rather say, you know what, why don't you just play NPCs? I'll give you an NPC. We know he's going to die, and you're going to start another one, next session. How's that?
I have been known to kill a player, to kill my own character in a dramatic fashion if it's a story beat, and the look of horror on other people's faces when I do it is kind of funny.
Well, but that's kind of awesome to do it if there's a reason for it. I'm just saying that the character gets bored with their, a player gets bored with their character and just kills it off like every 2 sessions. Like, all right, stop. Here you go. I'll make you care. I'll feed you NPCs, and we'll just know that they're going to die. How's that?
Yeah, it's I think I blew up in a Star Wars game. I had my droid character self-destruct to hold off the stormtroopers so the rest of the group can get away. And I have had a character in a pulp game go down with the plane to make sure that everybody else could get out and complete the objective.
But those are awesome characters. Those are awesome stories.
Yeah, I mean, a Call of Cthulhu game, I had a character, it's like, if I do like da-da-da and da-da-da rolls that are really, really narrow, can I perform X supernatural feat? Because my character has like a toe dipped into the supernatural, right? I'm like, all right, roll it. And he rolled really well, and he died, but it was cool.
We played Savage World Deadlands, and in that game you can get an extra ability by having a drawback on your character.
Yeah.
And I chose the drawback that he was hiding the fact that he was sick. And I think I mentioned him on the stream before, but my character, he was addicted to chewing tobacco. So I said, okay, he's in the early stages of throat cancer, and he's or whatever. Something serious is beginning, and he occasionally coughs up blood and struggles. And what happens when you've got that sort of flaw is you roll dice at the start of the session, and if you roll a certain number, your flaw advances. And it got to the point where his illness had advanced to a stage where it was becoming terminal. And at the end of that session, he basically walked into the middle of the enemy base and dropped a grenade on a load of explosives and took the base with him because he knew that he was dying. And that was his. The DM knew I was going to do it. The rest of the party didn't.
Systems with advantages and disadvantages always reminded me of this article or a blog post or something I read once where somebody theorized that all the Game of Thrones characters were actually from one of George R.R. Martin's GURPS campaigns. Because he's like, if you look at them all, it's like, so you've got Tyrion, he's like knows everything, charismatic, blah blah blah, rogue skills out, out the yin yang, dwarf, disfigured. He's like such and such he's the greatest swordsman, blah 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 blah. Noble family, dark secret. It's like it just reads like character development in those systems where you can min-max through advantages and disadvantages.
He's a gamer, isn't he? As far as I know.
Oh yeah, he's a war gamer and an RPG gamer.
Well, I mean, I don't mind stuff like that. The problem that I have, and to be fair, this is, I remember someone having World of Darkness playing, I think it was Dark Fate, where it says he's going to die in some horrible incident. And the problem that I had was the character's like, that's cool, I know when I'm going to die. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, it's like when you fail your dexterity check crossing the subway and hit the third rail and electrocute yourself, that wasn't wasn't quite what the character generation said, was it?
Well, it's supposed to be some horrible fate, like okay,
I guess that is horrible.
We're going to say that you're going to be eaten by bugs, trapped all alone in the swamp, slowly drowning. You're going to do something like that, and they're like, okay, we go into the city. I'm going to fight so and so. Oh yes, but you're in a club. I can't set everything up for that. He's like, well, you have to let me die on this. All right, stop. I like the idea of flaws. The problem is I am somewhat a recovering min-maxer, so I have to like pull myself back, and I have to do the same, which also puts me the other way of telling players, no, you're not doing that. You're just making my job harder. You're not making the game more fun. Stop.
It's part of being a recovering min-maxer, like going to Alcoholics Anonymous and saying, hello, I'm Omen Owl, and I'm a min-maxer.
Did you have to write to all of your former DMs and fellow players to make amends? Not making fun of 12-step programs or anything, but
Well, the one time I stopped doing it was when I realized that everyone else was doing it as well. It just depends on your group, and I realized I'm not having more fun necessarily by having great stats. And a lot of times you're actually hurting yourself. It sounds really cool, especially if you're at first level. I have 18/00 strength. Yeah, but you're a glass cannon, and the DM has a choice. Either he puts you up against more opponents to give you a challenge, which means that one hit you're down, or you just walk through the encounter after encounter, and it's not very interesting for either person. And
you don't get goblins at first level anymore. You get hobgoblins and ogres.
Yeah, for decades, one of my my fellow players was best friend from high school and ended up being roommates for like 10 years and stuff in our 20s and everything. Just a gamer house. It was like utopia. 5 gamers living together. He was the most infuriating person to play with because, we'd play Marvel superheroes, for example, and I'm making some like X-Men level kind of like, mutant who just got their powers, and he's like, I am the mighty Thor. I'm like, that is not balanced. I'm like, and he would do it all the time. And then he also loved to use his own PCs as DM PCs. So we'd often revolve DMing in the same campaign setting. And, here he is running this campaign, and the NPC that shows up is his paladin.
I hate, and I'm going to say this as a DM, I hate having preferred characters that are DM characters. All my characters are meant to die at some point if I'm the DM.
Oh, what's worse is he would give them XP for the stuff they did in the game. So like the next time he was a player, his character would have that XP.
I
use NPCs heavily, but they're never DMPCs.
Oh yeah, I mean, I have favorite NPCs, and I have NPCs that are recurring and long term. But yeah, they're not mine.
Well, I what I want to say is it's not necessarily that I have favorite NPCs. I want players to have favorite NPCs, and that's what I want. And then that can include villains. You know, someone that they want to like kill and everything else.
Everybody loves Darth Vader.
Well, what was the what I love is if you ever familiar with Babylon 5 and Bester. That it's just boy, talk about someone that after watching, which I love to watch him on screen, but I always want to take a shower after doing it, just because I just felt so slimy being around it.
Oh, even in like Breaking Bad. I mean, is there a character in that entire show you can't love?
I think I'm going to put in chat, but I think all min-maxers should be introduced to Call of Cthulhu, and they get the quandary of do they get tons and tons of really good skills at the start of the game through having a high intelligence? Because having a high intelligence means you actually understand.
I love the sanity rules. Yeah,
you understand what's making you go mad much sooner, and you are more likely to suffer due to insanity if you are more intelligent.
Yeah, being a moron saves you in Call of Cthulhu.
Deal with that, min-maxers. Deal with that.
Well, and I like Call of Cthulhu because you're talking about min-maxers is I can cast all these really cool spells. Like, yes, and you lose your sanity and everything else with it. I do enjoy that aspect.
Yeah, and you can never max more than the great old ones and stuff anyway. So.
Well, I haven't played Call of Cthulhu in decades. I bought Pulp Cthulhu because I kind of like the higher end stuff. I saw you just grit amidst your teeth, so.
Oh, I'm just the subject of my video I did the other day.
Yes,
that was cool.
I see that. I saw Pulp Cthulhu, and I would love to do that sometime. But some games I would rather be a player. I don't want to be a DM. It's one of those that I think requires a lot of. If you don't buy a module, you can do a lot of work on the back end to do investigation, and sometimes it feels like herding cats. And like let me try getting you back on track so this story will go somewhere.
We should do a stream about that because I can tell you that you don't have to have a lot to run a good game of Call of Cthulhu. Some of the best ones I've run based on player feedback have been, I wouldn't call them single room, but very limited area games with a very minimal hook that was very ad hoc, very ad-libbed with a few notes. Like
one of the best Call of Cthulhu games I played in was at a convention. It was a little convention in Birmingham, and just joined the game randomly, and there was one room, and we slowly discovered more and more about the person who died in this room, and we spent 3 hours examining the room, and I think all of us pretty much went mad. And that was it. It was the whole adventure was probably a page that the guy was running it from, but he did a great job.
Yeah, one of the most remembered games of Call of Cthulhu for my group was the first one I ever ran, and all I had to start with is at the top of my page, Christmas in a Cabin. And and then from there I wrote up a real quick sketch of an NPC, and all I did was look through my PDFs for various Call of Cthulhu stuff and grabbed a stat block for a lawyer and just cut and pasted it, because that's the nice thing, you're dealing with real people. And so real people are easy to borrow. And then I borrowed another stat block for like a dilettante or something like that, Yogg.com has a lot of the good stuff for that too, pre-made characters, and I just put her stats down. And the only other thing I had was a list of gifts that she had bought to make friends with her lawyer boyfriend's social group, which is the players, and that was it. And from there, there's an evil buried in the mountains nearby, and then there are moonshiners, getting killed in the night. They're hearing gunshots. Something is stalking around the cabin. And it was very minimal, but the climax was some snake man mummy slithering down their chimney, trying to having already half devoured the lawyer's girlfriend, and my wife's character deciding to take the gift she was given, which was a statue of Yig, and start beating the mummy, not knowing that the mummy was from that sect of snake people that moved away from Yig, so the idol of Yig was actually having an effect on it. And it was, but the only notes I had were Christmas in a cabin, a couple of maps. Now, for me, maps means pulling out a program and making cool, colorful maps, but because we're playing along. But you don't have to do that. You'll find a pre-made Sears catalog cabin map somewhere.
So,
and
what software do you use to make your maps? Just curious.
The one that I use for most of my Call of Cthulhu stuff, because it has modern assets, is Dungeon Fog.
Okay,
that's what I use.
But hey, but when I don't want to draw a map, I will go ahead and look up floor plans for asylums, floor plans for sanitariums, floor plans for health spas. I've got a Pinterest list that is all just like period floor plans for houses, office buildings, things like that. The maps I have drawn was the player's home base, which is my wife's character's brownstone in San Francisco, because we don't play in Lovecraft Country because we're West Coasters, or we were. But and then I drew for the Christmas in a Cabin, because it was the first game. I went overboard and got crazy, but I could have just as easily picked up some floor plan map for, from the old Sears catalog of, a one room, cabin in the woods. It's amazing what a really mundane idea and a good sense of spooky can do for Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah, because most of it, it's all going on in the players' heads, and the characters' heads.
Yeah, and they don't know. The one thing to remember when you're running Call of Cthulhu is your players never know what the actual fuck is going on.
It sounds like a game you didn't half the time. You were just making it up.
Well, then that's where I was going. So if you decide to, go left when you may have gone right before, because it just makes sense, they're never going to be any wiser, and they're probably going to have fun anyways. And you can also just take dramatic beats, like if it's dragging a little bit, like if the investigation seems to be going on too long, and all they seem to be doing is library checks and checking out this. And first of all, that can be fun in and of itself, depending on how much you like to role play. But you can always just throw something unexpected, like, and as you're going to that warehouse, you notice a car following you. It's taken the same last 3 turns you've taken, and it could be nothing. It could just be a taxi going to the same part of town, or it could be cultists, or it could be a taxi carrying cultists.
And going back to the whole experience point.
Yeah, sorry.
Going back to the whole, and I think I said at the time when we mentioned it an hour or two ago, the way Call of Cthulhu develops characters, I think, is fantastic.
Yeah.
If you succeed in an ability, you tick it, and at the end of the session, the adventure, whatever, you roll on the stat, and if you roll a fail, you've learned something.
I like that, as well as I like the fact that stats go up based on what you use.
Yep.
A lot more than other stuff, and it encourages players to do things. But that also comes back, which is what I was saying. Sometimes when players don't know what they're going to get into, hey, you get to decide on how you're going to put your stats as we play the game, and that way you can you don't feel like, well, I put all these points over here and it's not being used. But I do like, I mean, I've liked a lot of different XP systems. I like skill-based systems more than I do level-based systems.
Same.
But level-based systems, I think, are easier to create challenges for, in my view. I can say, okay, this is about what they should be able to take. Whereas skill-based systems, who knows? It could go one way or the other very quickly.
I think Call of Cthulhu is really forgiving there because one of the basic conceits of the game is often just everyman characters. So having a set of skill sets, or a set of skills, sorry, stammering, that doesn't make sense for an adventurer is okay, because it's often figuring out what you can do with what you have, and I think that just ramps up the tension in the game. Like, I am a secretary, and I am a plumber, and I am a furniture mover, and there's Amigo. What do I do?
Well, the other thing is, okay, yeah, okay, you're quote the fighter. You're not the most useful player in the party. In fact, you're pretty low on the totem pole.
Yeah, one of the other things I like about Call of Cthulhu is I think it's near impossible to get ability scores to go up. I mean, there are ways in there, but it's not core to the game. I mean, your strength is going to be your strength until something sucks it away.
And you're going to have about 10 hit points for your entire adventuring life.
Yep, and 145 caliber bullet can take all of them.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
Well, and it doesn't matter with that Tommy gun with the 45. You're fighting an unkillable evil. So yeah, that's. I mean, I like the idea of Call of Cthulhu. I just haven't played it in decades, and that's one of those that I would rather be a player than trying to be the GM for.
So, Geek, you've run Call of Cthulhu a few times, right?
Yeah.
So, one of the things I think that's hard to sell with Call of Cthulhu players, especially when transitioning from other games, is the idea of winning without necessarily resolving or defeating the situation. Like in D&D and and stuff in other adventure games, there's very much kind of this expectation that we will win, big quotes, because obviously it's a role-playing game. Everybody wins by having fun, by completing the adventure. Finding the big bad or finding the treasure, whatever it is. But Call of Cthulhu, I mean, it's interesting to try and sell the idea and try and get people to realize that sometimes the best resolution is getting away alive, or with some smidgen of information, or an imperfect victory. One of my scenarios, they ended up, they survived. They destroyed the machine that the evil doctor was using to try and pull Yog-Sothoth out of space and down to Earth. But they, as they left the island, they saw the tragically mutated daughter of the housekeeper standing on the shore. So she was still alive. This monster that was still on this island off the west coast. So
I find the rewards in Call of Cthulhu come from. I mean, if you're an action type player who likes rolling lots of dice and having big numbers, it's not going to suit you. But if you've got a group of players who really enjoy getting into the details, puzzle solving, coming up with crazy ideas, Call of Cthulhu it's satisfying just to play it, whether or not those ideas work. Because I found my players, when I was running it, my players seemed to get satisfaction just from finding something that triggered me giving them a handout. And they'd be like, "Oh, props, handout, fantastic!"
Yeah, that's a big reward thing in that game. Is handouts, tidbits of information, and also sometimes it's fun because in the game there'll also be those moments where, by all accounts, the players should be horrified, terrified, but that still is fun. Like running one of the few modern games I ran, modern Cthulhu games, it just kept going through a series of what the fuck moments. Like, what? Can it get any worse? Yeah, and yes, it did,
Yes.
and like but every time they discovered something, it was they were happy, even though things were getting really, really bad. I think that's a horror movie thing. Like, we all watch horror movies, watching this tragedy of events. Things get worse and worse and worse, and that's kind of the same draw.
I want to run Forget Me Not again. I've banged on a lot about it on my channel and stuff. I ran it at the table in a someone's kitchen that was quite noisy with kids running around, and it still proved to be disturbing for everybody. I'd love to see how it worked running entirely over Discord with just voice and descriptions, and getting the added level of concentration that you get from having to focus on entirely theatre of the mind over Discord. I'd love to. It's something I want to run in the non too distant future, but there's so many things I want to run. It's the whole game ADHD thing where you just chop and change what you want to run all the time.
I think from my perspective, I'm just looking at this because, like I said, I haven't played a long time. The fact that you can still tie things together to make an overarching without the players ever knowing what's going on until much, much later. And then everything starts clicking and they're like, oh, well, wait a minute. How deep does this rabbit hole go? But yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I think playing in modern settings or even in the 1920s, and even into like Gaslight era, there's a baseline familiarity with those periods that allows a keeper, GM, whatever you want to call them, to really bounce and flex on the fly. I mean, the easiest one would be modern, because literally you're playing today, so we all know what's there. We all know exactly what to expect. But yeah, even with like the 1920s, I mean, going back, it's just like with D&D and stuff. Of course, we're playing a medieval fantasy land, so it doesn't all have to line up and doesn't have to have that sense of gritty realism. Whereas if you were to play like Cthulhu Dark Ages, you might be delving a little bit more into history and stuff, but you can still take it from a very cinematic point of view. Like, what would a movie that takes place in the Dark Ages do here?
Well,
I struggle to when things get too fantastical. I struggle to improvise.
Yeah.
What was it? In the Name of the Rose would be a good.
Oh yeah,
you could go really deep into stuff like that.
Because in that, I mean, right off the top of my head, in there, like the poison in the ink or whatever that they kept that they end up finding, at least in the movie. Like, what if instead of poison ink, it's alien spores that are collecting on the edges of the parchment, because they're actually recording the words of some babbling idiot god they have trapped in a cellar somewhere, but in the air in that room, it's just full of otherworldly fungus and stuff.
Well, I mean, you can do that. You can include the other movie I was thinking of is if you include something like The Witch.
Oh yeah.
Well, that's what anyway. You get when you can combine those two aspects, and they're like, oh, is this woman actually innocent or guilty? And then in the meantime, you start seeing these monks disappearing, and just when you lead over and like, I think this monk is guilty, he dies off. You're like, what is going on? And
oh yeah,
there's a lot of the investigative aspects. I mean, that's one of those things I'd love to do with a good group. But do I want to run it? The answer is no. I don't think that's my skill set as a GM to do some of that. So I would leave that alone. But I think it'd be fantastic to run.
I mean, Call of Cthulhu suits my personal strengths as a GM. My weakness as a GM, I'm bad at organizing. I'm bad at remembering mechanical details of an adventure. Well, I can remember mechanical details of a system, but mechanical details of an adventure, I'm bad. But I'm good at making that sort of thing up on the fly, and I'm good at improvising conversations, which suits a Call of Cthulhu type game.
Yeah, definitely. I think even good number of the published ones, while I haven't played them, I've read through a lot of them, are often really just really well detailed frameworks that expect you to improvise, because you don't know what your players are going to do. It's very much a problem, obstacles, opportunities is the only thing you really need in the framework, and then the players are going to go do everything else. You don't have to have, this 15-foot hallway leads to this room that I mean, you can. There's actually one of the introductory books that was done for 7th edition was really cool in having essentially a dungeon crawl in there, because it was designed for, the whole book was designed as beginning adventures scenarios for Call of Cthulhu.
Doors to Darkness.
Exactly, that's the one. And there's that one that takes place in the Serpent Mound, I believe it is. It's essentially a dungeon crawl, and it's got traps, and it's got monsters, but it's still Call of Cthulhu. And I think that that you can wean your players off of that. I mean, we're way off of the topic of XP at this point, but
I mean, even the classic The Haunting, that house in the end, you play it a bit like a dungeon.
Oh yeah,
things in the house.
And I think that one is also being an introductory scenario, and also having come out at a time when we were really in the infancy of tabletop RPGs. They wrote it to be similar to a dungeon crawl because they knew their players, their potential market, were going to be coming out of D&D, or maybe RuneQuest.
But I think from my perspective is, I would feel kind of disappointed if I was doing a dungeon crawl in Call of Cthulhu. And again, that comes down to the expectations when you start reading some of the other adventures. I don't remember which ones they were, but one of them was you go to Oklahoma and you're trying to find out the preacher is doing something. I'm like, oh, okay. I kind of like having that. You go into a city and something's off and you can't put your finger on it, and you have to delve down to really explore that. Whereas a Cthulhu kind of reminds me, I'm not against, a dungeon delve to me would be the last thing that you would do at the end when you're trying to go at the very bottom to find out what this monster is that's controlling everyone.
Well, and there are often dungeon crawl aspects in a lot of the scenarios because, yes, clue, lair, or final encounter. And often the dungeon crawls are not necessarily room to room, but they might be building to building on a campus. Like I had one that was a veterans hospital where the doctor was using the milk of Shub-Niggurath to heal people, and was having great success rates until they went wrong. And so the players were looking around, getting clues, talking with patients, finding out how the building was structured, and eventually having a big showdown. Interesting enough, not with the doctor, but with his maintenance guy, and a shed full of mutants. But there are many sandboxy ones. There's the Star on the Shore or whatever it is. I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
That one is like just a massive sandbox.
I'm going to ask you a question here, which is, since we have talked about XP, what are your favorite XP mechanics? Now, we're not saying 1E or anything else from any game system that you would incorporate into, I guess, your ideal adventure or system.
I'm going to dredge up. I know I slated how complicated MERP was in terms of its XP, but there's one very nice aspect to it, in that the first time you achieve something or face a certain creature or have a certain experience, you get the XP, the standard XP award for it multiplied.
Okay.
To simulate that first experience.
That's cool.
No.
Makes sense.
Well, I mean, that would be really interesting when you first face a dragon.
Yeah. It does keep a bit of bookkeeping. I mean, but
I mean,
obviously,
the reverse of that, you could always mechanic it to do it in diminishing returns.
Yeah. Obviously, there's a bit of bookkeeping involved. But players have got to keep a little record of what creatures their characters have encountered.
Well, you have that in Call of Cthulhu, even with sanity.
Yeah.
You're like if you've maxed out the sanity you can take from a monster or anything in particular, then you are basically immune to that for a while because they're not going to get any freakier.
Or you take a minimum instead of rolling like D6, you just take 1 sanity point or something.
Yeah. Well, you can only take a certain amount. You can only take a maximum amount from one thing, according to the set. So like ghouls, I think, is a D6. So you'll only ever take 6 sanity for encountering ghouls, and that at a certain point, at least for and I think it's for the rest of that adventure, that scenario, unless you dip down, you recover sanity for whatever reason, you can't take any more sanity from ghouls. And then there's that's why you have to record your encounters with the with the mythos on the sheet, because then in non-game time that ticks down until you run into them again.
I mean, I'm going to go back to the forget-me-not scenario. At the start of that scenario, the keeper makes a few rolls, which define each character how much sanity they can lose for certain aspects of the adventure. And when they hit that limit, they don't lose any more. But those levels are typically quite high.
Yeah, my particular group is a little tricky to play because so many of them are war veterans, and if you use the extended careers rules from the player's companion, that veteran status makes them not take sanity hits from things like dead bodies and stuff like that because they've seen it all. But for me, I mentioned it earlier. I think not specifically the Marvel superheroes, face rip karma system, but that style of XP, the dynamic XP as actual currency that you can use in game, where you're expending in game, your opportunities to advance. Star Wars does this too. You can burn character points and stuff like that. The old West End Star Wars, that is. Burn character points to accomplish big things. Like, in Star Wars, like if you spend a character point, all your die codes are doubled for like a round or something like that. But I like that dynamic XP where you're not just racking up XP to save to spend on something, but it's something you can make use of in play.
It gives the player the choice, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it often creates much more dynamic play, especially if you do it in a way that is like going back to Marvel superheroes. There's a lot of things you can do with the expense of that karma. You can push rolls. You can push results. You can do power stunts, and it just for. I still attest to this day that that's probably the best system for playing a superhero universe that's ever been made. But yeah. Anyways, but that's the type of XP that I like. The dynamic XP mechanic is something I would like to put into a game.
The only problem I've had with Marvel superheroes is that no one ever wanted to play an ongoing campaign with their own heroes, and I had a few adventures for it, and we never had enough players to play the full adventuring team that each module was designed for. It was a massive imbalance in terms of which characters my players wanted to play. Day of the Octopus, nobody ever wanted to play Captain Marvel, even though she was probably the most powerful one.
Now, our problem was having players want to play the same character more than once because they're always coming up with new ones.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Everyone wants to play Spider-Man in Day of the Octopus.
Well, speaking of, the XP system for that, I kind of like where it's split in half or so. so you don't get one character that's advancing really fast while the others are burning everything. But yeah, I can understand. I know. I think the cipher system does some of that, and it's the other problem I have with a lot of these is that if you have a mechanic like that, your players and you try just doing a one shot to see how the game works. Oh, geez, they burn through everything so fast. It's like, well, that gives you an unrealistic expectation of the game.
It's like in Call of Cthulhu when they just burn all their luck on a one shot.
Yeah, or they decide to push all their rolls or whatever. The one advantage to a dynamic XP system that that doesn't get looked at a lot is in terms of long-term campaign play. One of the biggest problems in a lot of game systems with trying to keep a campaign going is that power creep that keeps happening. Eventually, I mean, granted, you're going up in level is fun and everything, but there's certain something to be said for staying in that sweet spot. And by having players expend their XP, you keep them playable at a certain power level for a long time. Now, in Marvel, that may work fine because, face it, in the comic books, characters rarely ever actually get any better until it's really important. It's a crucial dynamic moment. But because Spider-Man's been doing the same tricks for 50 years.
I mean, even going back to AD&D, though, you look back at the sweet spot was around level 4, 5, 6, 7. But
anything above 10, and you're just like, most campaigns fizzled out by then.
Well, and 10 was supposed to be like ultra heroic. You're going to other planes at that point.
Well, yes, but the idea is like to keep that campaign going, staying in that sweet spot for a while.
My point was that when you got to level 4, 5, 6, 7, that's when characters really slowed down in terms of leveling. So it sort of naturally, you'd go from going up one level per adventure, to one level per 3 adventures sometimes, and those 3 adventures could take you 2 or 3 months to play. So it naturally, the game spent longer at those levels, and that was a good thing.
Yeah, and when we were doing Marvel with the dynamic stuff, it was really easy early on to hold on to your XP because often you didn't have enough karma necessarily to do a lot of power stunts. Most characters would start with enough karma to do a few pushes. But if you really wanted to develop your character, you had to save your XP. But the game is also a superhero game, and so there's often instances where you just have no choice but to spend karma. Like, okay, well, that building is falling towards a crowded, event center. What are you doing?
Let it fall, you lose karma because people suffer.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. So I think that game, again, building in that extended play at those ranges where it's still fun, and ultimately, again, going back to Owl's comment about epic play and planar travel. Once you get into those super high levels in a game like Marvel, for example, suddenly you're leaving Earth and dealing, like to use the X-Men as a parallel, you're going in and hanging out with the Shi'ar Empire and dealing with the Brood, and or if you're in the Fantastic Four, suddenly you're off cruising with Silver Surfer and dealing with cosmic stuff. Or any number of characters who decides to go adventuring with Thor because hey, why not?
And looking at it, and you just brought something up that came to mind. Some of the coolest spells in D&D are all 3rd level.
Very true.
That's very true. Once you hit like the 1st and 2nd are a little bit of utility. They got some combat spells. But boy, when you get 5th. Oh, I can get lightning bolt. I can get fireball. I can get fly. And then when 4th, but some of those once you get at the higher levels, they don't sound that much more interesting. And
3rd and 4th level spells. You say fireball, lightning bolt, fly, and then you've got confusion and polymorph, and they're all in that sweet spot.
What's funny is those spells always, to me, I mean, they just seem absolutely artificially they should be at higher levels in my brain because of what they can do, but they knew when they were designing the game this is what a wizard player wants to do. We're not going to make him wait more than 5 levels to be able to, like, start chucking fire and lightning, because it takes a while before you get other abilities and other classes that come anywhere near that.
Oh yeah.
Well, of course, a 5th level character has 13 hit points as a wizard on average.
That's true. I used to always
Yes.
make my fellow players mad, though, because I like to play utility wizards, and they're like, "Why can't you take Fireball?" I'm like, "I don't want to take Fireball."
I love utility wizards. When you get knock is like, it was a 2nd level spell.
We'll see
Polymorph-
who's crying when we don't have an identify spell in the party.
or what? But isn't ESP or clairvoyance? There's several.
ESP is like a 1st level spell, isn't it?
Yeah. A wizard gets it at 3rd level. So
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good spell. Good spell to have. But it's so rarely taken in my games.
It's because everybody
Anyway.
wants to fire fireballs and
I got kicked out of a game for wanting to play a utility wizard. I was like, oh, we can do this, and it was a GM character which he was kind of playing off his own. I said, well, okay, but I really don't want to do the combat. Can I do utility? And the more I talked to him, the more I realized that this was a character he wanted to play as a player, and I was destroying his idea of it, and I got uninvited.
yeah, a utility wizard is nothing I would ever get mad at. I did have a player who I kind of got really frustrated with, and he's like, I want to play a cleric, but I don't want to be the healer. 5th edition again, mind you, so there's lots of other stuff for clerics to do. I'm like, he's like, can you tell he's like, can we keep the fact that I'm a cleric secret from the other players, because I don't want them to constantly be expecting me to heal them all the time. I'm like, dude, you're making the cleric. Even in 5th edition, you have one job, one requirement that everybody's going to consider what you want you to do, and it's like, I mean, how is that bad that the party is expecting? Well, I want to be able to do other stuff on my turn. I'm like, well, nothing says that you have to like just acquiesce every time they want a heal spell, but I sure as hell hope you're going to heal them if they're down to like 2 hit points.
Well,
I'm firmly in favour of clerics being using more defensive magic initially than healing.
It's the only way you survive.
well, I think, and this is where it sometimes comes down to it. I don't know about you all, but usually most of my games were about 4 to 5 players, or 4 to 5 people, to be fair. And it's like, well, each of you has to take a role, whereas I think sometimes 1st edition was really intended to be 6 to 8, really, for the adventures. And you look at it, it's like, you do defensive spells, you do healing spells, you do utility spells, you do combat spells. And we have 2 thieves because the thieves die every time they open up a trap and it's poison. So you needed that. And then you had a couple of fighters or fighter types so they could just hold back. Well, I mean, you had the couple of clerics, but the idea was you have someone in the back to defend the wizards. Usually, he'll do the arrows. And then you have a couple clerics and the fighter up front that are trying to hold back whatever they're fighting while the magic users are casting spells. Yeah, he's right. I mean, this Mage's Musings, 6 to 8 plus retainers.
We never used retainers. I think we've somehow missed the entire idea that you're supposed to take retainers into adventures, and no wonder our adventures were so hard. But also, no wonder our characters went up in level so quick.
Well, I was reading the old school reincarnated B1 and B2, and it specifically says you're kind of expected to get retainers. And I think that sometimes we miss that looking at these old modules. Like, we played it wrong back then. We didn't.
Yeah, my friend and I sat down with a 1st edition player's handbook one time because we were just like, okay, we're killing time between games. I'm like, did you ever play with that? I don't remember it at all. Did you know this was in the game? No, I thought that came out in 3rd edition. It's like, but also with B1 or B2, excuse me, being like such an introductory one, so many people probably just pulled that box open and just started rolling dice and didn't even pay attention to the details.
Right. I'm going to call a halt to this in a minute because it's 38 minutes past midnight here.
Oh, jeez.
All right. Well, sorry about that. Keeping you up here so late.
Yeah.
It's
It's like 6:30 my time.
Well, and you might want to look at this. Well, it's 6:30 my time. Is like maybe next week. All the rules we got wrong that we wish we had known.
That's actually a good idea. I think that might be a very, very good idea for
That
for
would
a
be
chat.
fun one.
Yes, I think so. But I am going to have to call it here because I've got work
All right.
in 8 hours from now.
All right. Well, have a good night.
Have a good night.
Right.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Elfbait. Thank you, Omanal. Thank you, everyone else who's joined in. Thank you, chat. Chat's been brilliant tonight. I'm still 15 subs away from 1,000, so click on that.
Plus 500 XP to everybody in the chat.
Yes. So I think all the rules we got wrong is a good idea for next time. I'll have to remember that. But thank you all for taking part once again. It's been a good old chat. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm going to end it now.
Night.
Night.